Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
My father was a pretty easygoing person. He was always the fun dad who'd get my brother and I what we want from McDonald's or take us to the arcade downtown over the weekend. We'd play catch in the backyard and go hiking in the Green Mountains that always stood as the backdrop of my childhood. He was a very outgoing person and active in our small town community. He coached my baseball team and sometimes stood in as an assistant scoutmaster for our local troop, Troop 191. I looked up to him a lot, more than maybe most if I'm being honest with myself. Definitely more than my brother Sean. And now I look back at how my father was, especially during my most formative years, and I wonder how exactly he did it. He was the owner of a local security company. They'd set up cameras, alarms, the whole 9 yards. They also provided guards and watchman services. As far as I'm aware, these jobs were few and far between. It was fairly rare that any person or place really needed protection in Harmon. Our police force had a total of 5 members, and they were all part-timers other than the chief. What I didn't realize as a child was my father's company was farther reaching than Harmon's vague borders with the wilderness that surrounded it. They were contracted across the state, across New England sometimes. Again, most of this was alarm and camera security system work. Glorified electricians essentially, but they were good at what they did. The watchman positions only became available every once in a blue moon, and that was only because my father rarely took those jobs. He didn't even have dedicated employees for the work, simply hired freelancers looking for a quick buck, essentially watching cameras in an office for 8 hours a night. Things started to change after the recession, however. People didn't have the money to splurge on expensive security systems. My father knew we would struggle if he didn't make changes, and soon what was the outlying limb of his business became its core. People needed work, more and more properties were being neglected and abandoned, and my father saw that opportunity to capitalize on both. I remember he started coming home later than usual. Sometimes I didn't even see him until the next morning. Frankly, I was too young to really know what was going on. Sean might have been more aware, but I've never talked to him about it. As I grew up, I learned little bits and pieces of the night watchmen my father employed and the places they were hired to guard. He'd usually have some funny story to tell of the nightly reports he had come in. Sometimes there was nothing he'd tell me, however. When he got home, he'd simply drop his coat off in the mudroom and brush past my brother and I towards my mother with nothing but a shallow smile. I would watch my mother wrap her arms around him and they'd quietly walk into the next room, away from our prying ears and my prying eyes. As I grew older and all through high school, I was asked by many of my classmates if my dad could get them into one of the many properties which they surveyed. I'd always say no, of course. My father was very adamant about how dangerous those places were. He'd always say, "We aren't protecting the property from people, we are protecting people from the property." And anytime anybody I knew would try to make it past the watchman, they would end up in my father's office by the morning. Despite usually having known them since they were 5, Harmon was a small town after all. He never hesitated to let the police teach them a lesson. That included my best friend Devin, who lived 2 houses down from mine. Devin was probably one of the worst offenders if I'm being honest. I never dared join him on any of his expeditions, but once he got a car he was gone pretty much every single night. He was a smart kid, far more intelligent than the normal crowd that would break into any of the places my father's company surveyed. As a result, he got away with it. He wasn't there to trash the places though, just explore from what I was told. He'd show me pictures he took off his camera during lunch at school the next day, and to be honest, I didn't really understand the appeal. They just seemed like abandoned buildings, dirty, dusty, and probably dangerous. My father's words were still etched into my mind. Devin always defended his expeditions, however, despite the risks he took to achieve them. After high school, I honestly didn't know what to do with myself. I tried my hand at community college, but that didn't go far. Looked into the trades, but I'll be the first to admit I wasn't built for the blue-collar lifestyle. After 6 months or so in the spring of 2018, my father offered me a job. "Hey kiddo, can I come in?" he asked, knocking on my bedroom door. I swung around in my desk chair, pausing the game I was playing. "Yeah, of course," I replied with a bit of hesitation. I knew this conversation was coming. It had been months and I'd been stuck working at the local urgent care behind the front desk, a carryover from my short interest in pursuing medicine. It wasn't the most glorious work, and sometimes it certainly wasn't pretty, but I was comfortable there. He sat down on the bed across from me and folded his hands, letting out that sigh that always came before your parents said something you didn't want to hear. Adam, we need to talk about where you're going, he said plainly. What do you mean where I'm going? I mean where you're going, what you want to do with your life, college, career, anything at all. I hate seeing you just wasting your time here. He elaborated. Dad, I have a steady job. I'm just figuring out what I want to do, I said as sternly as I could muster. It was a weak attempt. You told me that back in the fall. It's May now, son. I gave you your time. Now I just can't watch you waste your time anymore, my father admitted. What are you trying to say? I asked with a bit of hesitance. I want to give you an opportunity, since clearly you aren't pursuing one yourself. He finally spit out, a job, working for me. Dad, no, I'm not. He quickly cut me off. Adam, listen, it's better pay than you're getting. Hell, it's better pay than your brother is going to get once he finishes school. It can be the start of a career for you, or at the very least, you can start saving some real money for the future. And it's easy work. You'll have plenty of time to figure out what you want to do. He tried selling me, even repeating my own words. I shut my eyes for a moment and exhaled. What's the job? I asked begrudgingly, knowing this was less of a choice than he was making it out to be. Night watchman, 5 days a week, 8 hours each day. I'll even let you pick your days off. I thought you didn't want me going to those places. Aren't they dangerous after all? I questioned, trying to use his words against him. He rolled his eyes. I know what you're doing, son, and you're not a kid anymore. Plus, you'll be there legally, not trespassing like your friends. I'd be handpicking your assignments anyways. I won't have you going. If I'm going to take this job, I don't want any special treatment, Dad, I argued. You offer me this job, I will go where you'd send any other watchman. He didn't respond for a moment, clearly not having a quick counter like he did for anything else I'd said up until that point. If that's what you want. He finally stumbled out, less assertive than before. His demeanor had completely changed in those few moments. Any confidence he conveyed had eroded severely. He looked at me with eyes that told me to fight the offer that he himself had just been arguing for, and I looked back at him with a new sense of cockiness, like I'd somehow beat him at his own game. I barely even thought about what I was doing. I knew my job was dead end anyway, so I didn't see much stake in keeping it. Maybe this was a smart idea. My father had always had my best interest in mind. He wouldn't have ever offered this to me if he thought I couldn't handle it. But then again, I had thrown in a term that he did not offer. I'll do it, I agreed simply, giving him a smile. He nodded silently, slowly rising from the bed and walking towards the door. Alright, I'll let you put your 2 weeks in then, I guess we'll get to work. Looking forward to it, Dad, I told him. He bit his lip, looking like he was holding back something as he shut the door behind him. I didn't think twice about it, more interested in returning to my game than my father's minute facial expressions. In my own defense, I was 19 and I was stupid. After I'd finished up at the urgent care, my father started me out shadowing one of his other watchmen. His name was George, an older man in his early 60s. He had bushy gray hair with a matching mustache and always wore a shirt and tie to the job, despite my father insisting to me that just a solid black shirt and pants would do fine. George took his job seriously, but he seemed happy to take me under his wing when my father explained the situation. I worked with George for 2 weeks, watching over the light bulb factory that had closed about 10 miles outside of Harmon. I remember people talking about it the first couple of years after it closed. Devin went a couple of times, but I guess the owners were tired of the place getting broken into and my father was the man to call. George explained all the odds and ends of the job, when to interfere, when to make the call to the police, and how to use the camera system in the security trailer. Admittedly, upon first impressions, this might have been the easiest job of my life. The first week, nothing happened, and I mean nothing. George started letting me lead the perimeter walks, camera setups, and system checks, but other than that, we sat in that little office all night long. It took a bit for George to start talking, but once he did, I barely got a word in. It made the nights fly by, the man telling me his life story night after night in almost chronological order. He had plenty of time after all, we weren't going anywhere. The second week I had my first encounter. I had graduated from leading perimeter walks to soloing them. George assured me he was watching me the whole time and we had walkies if anything went wrong. I wasn't too worried though, the place had been dead all of the last week, and this week was shaping up to be no different. I rounded the corner of one of the old brick buildings into a courtyard before stopping dead in my tracks. Through the open window on my left, I heard the crackle of broken glass and the shift shifting of dust over the concrete floor inside. My heart dropped for a moment before I tried to regain my composure, pulling out my flashlight and shining it through the window. "Is somebody in there? This is security," I said as seriously as I could pull together. I waited for a moment but got no response, not a sound. I let out a sigh, pulling out my radio. "Hey George, I think I've got someone inside building 5. I dispatched." "You need a hand, kid?" he asked in a scratchy, gruff voice. I'm gonna check it out myself. I'll let you know, alright?" I decided, starting to walk towards the ajar door to the left of the window. Also, they've got to secure these doors. "I've been saying that for months. Alright, just watch yourself in there, Adam. Remember, these places can be dangerous," he advised. "I can be there in 2 minutes if you need." "Got it, will do." I answered quickly, clipping the radio back to my pocket and pulling open the old metal door. I stepped up to the factory floor and found the space completely void of movement, void of sound, void of life. It was dark, dank, and water pooled where the ceiling leaked. Old equipment was still bolted to the floor and made the vast space feel like a maze with only my flashlight to guide me. I called out again. "This is security. If you're in here, I'm gonna find you. This is private property and you're trespassing," I said, repeating another one of George's lines he taught me. My words echoed off the distant walls of the space, making me feel even more isolated and small. Despite it being a pleasant 65 outside, inside it couldn't have been higher than 40. I shivered as I stepped further into the moonlit space, surveying every nook and cranny I could find. A shiver went up my spine as I crossed into the next room. It might as well have been a clone of the last, but it felt noticeably different, colder and heavier, even more decayed. I heard the sound of the debris swishing under my feet as I walked. Dust, chipped paint, and glass crunched as I inspected the room, the same as the one before it. As I came to a stop and looked up at one of the massive pieces of machinery, I realized something was seriously wrong. While I was standing still, the sound of my footsteps kept going without me. And this wasn't an echo. That would have only lasted for a couple of seconds at most. This was clear, it was close, but slowly it sounded as if it were moving away. I stayed completely still, my heart pounding as I listened to the sound step around the machines, onto the catwalk with its distant metal clank, and back down to the factory floor on the other side of the room. Then it came to a standstill and the room returned to silence. I finally turned my head, my flashlight shaking in my hand as I crept around the corner, and there, standing at the far doorway into a long dark hallway, was the silhouette of a man. He stood completely still, almost like a cardboard cutout. I shined my light towards him, but the beam seemed to almost dissipate before it made it across the room. Despite what George had told me time and time again about confrontations, I had to admit I was terrified. As I slowly walked closer, I had to keep reminding myself that it's just a person. "Sir, you can't be here. This is private property," I stumbled out, completely failing to deliver an intimidating tone. I got no response from the man. His silhouette stayed exactly in its pose, standing almost inhumanely straight up. Even as I approached him, my flashlight's warm glow still wouldn't reach him. I tried whacking the battery compartment to get a little more juice out of the light, but all it did was kill the light completely. I tried to stay calm as the silhouette watched me from the doorway. I frantically tried sliding out the batteries and reinserting them, my eyes dashing between my hands and the silhouette. Screwing the cover back on, I flicked on the light to find the figure was gone. "Hey, stop screwing with me. We're gonna call the cops and you're going to be charged with trespassing," I warned in a futile state of panic. I turned around in circles, shining the light on any and every surface of the room. He hadn't gone far, he couldn't have. I didn't even hear his footsteps and it had only been a moment. I finally rested my eyes back in front of me and there, just as I'd left him, was the silhouette of the man. The flashlight did nothing to give the figure any details. He remained as dark and featureless as our surroundings. "What the?" I whispered through quivering lips, dropping the light to my side. Finally, for the first time since I'd laid my eyes on him, the silhouette of the man moved. His arm stretched stiffly towards the open door, like the muscles hadn't been used in years. His hand closed slowly into a fist and he began to knock against the metal. At first they were nonsensical, slow, and the sound of the metal interrupted the immense silence that filled the space between us. I stood completely stunned, frozen, and unable to move. I thought to turn and run, but I feared what would happen if I lost eye contact with the figure. I could feel my heart pounding as the knocks started to become more consistent, but still slow and intentional. The man let the sound play out before he'd go again, and the knocks became more aggressive and loud, almost unnaturally so. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, surrounding me in a way that I couldn't explain. Then it came to a stop as quickly as it began. The arm lifted one last time and gently tapped the door in a familiar rhythm, the shave and a haircut. I watched it lower back to to his side, just as jagged and stiff as it had raised. The figure's body then turned to face the open doorway to his right and slowly, almost robotically, walked through the door and out of my view. I quickly started to breathe freely again, my breaths long and labored. "Get your stuff together, Adam. Get this guy and call George," I whispered to myself as I hesitantly stepped forward. My slow walk quickly grew to a run as my fear mounted. The worst case scenarios and unknowns were building in my mind before I whipped around the corner the man had just stepped through. The room was small, with lines of shelves on either side and a small window towards the ceiling at the far end. Its safety glass was shattered, but the wire mesh kept it in place. The room was empty. Nothing disturbed, no footprints, no other way out than through the doorway I'd watched since he'd walked through it. Any sense of calm I had disintegrated almost immediately. My eyes danced from wall to wall, hoping somehow I'd missed the full-grown human that should have been standing right in front of me. My mouth fell agape as I stepped back slowly, almost dropping my flashlight with how much my hands were shaking. I grabbed the walkie from my pocket, admitting defeat as I was completely and unabashedly freaking out. "George, hey, it's Adam. I don't know what's going on, but this guy keeps disappearing and he was banging on the walls trying to freak me out. Can you give me a hand finding him?" I asked, my voice a stuttering mess as I tried to downplay exactly what I'd been experiencing. The line stayed static, my mentor's familiar gruff voice absent where it should have been. "Hey, you there?" I asked again after a few moments of static, and again I heard nothing. George, pick up the walkie," I ordered, feeling the panic swelling inside me, but George never answered. I looked in either direction, trying to find the nearest exit. In the darkness, I couldn't make out anything, and I tried to retrace my steps towards the door I'd entered through. My walk was slow, cautious, as I moved around the dusty assembly lines and heavy machinery. As I passed a row of dirty, fogged windows, a rush of wind whistled through the building, sending the trees outside swaying and loose debris inside flying. Tree branches smacked against the windows as I passed, making me jump back in fright. I was more on edge than I'd ever been before, and if I'd heard a pin drop, I imagine my ears would have caught it. I continued past the windows, barely making it a few feet before realizing that something wasn't right. While the wind had subsided, the branches kept hitting the windows. I swung my light around faster than I'd ever moved before, but it revealed nothing. The branches were completely still, yet the tapping continued. It was slow, purposeful, and I quickly understood its source wasn't something outside. I finally took off in a dash towards the next room, the soft taps of the window behind me turning into aggressive, loud bangs. The sounds bashed off of different materials, metal, brick, wood, anything that was available. I didn't dare look behind me as I tripped around the corner into the next room, but it followed me faster than I could run away. I could hear objects right beside me being pounded, smashed and tossed, shaking the floor beneath my feet. I saw the moonlight shining through the open doorway in front of me as I kept running as fast as I possibly could, the vigorous, angry violence behind me gaining closer and closer to my ears. I heard loud bangs against the brick wall beside me, so strong that the plaster began to crack and chip. I swung around the handrail and felt something knock my leg out from under me, twisting my ankle as I tumbled down the stairs and out onto the crumbling concrete. I didn't move for a moment, almost hoping that I could somehow play dead, but that thought didn't last long. I quickly pushed myself to my feet, feeling the throbbing pain in my ankle as I hobbled away from the doorway. I barely made it 5 feet before collapsing to the ground again, starting to cry as I rolled onto my back. I picked my head up and looked back at the factory building. Silence surrounded me as if nothing had happened. The leaves of the trees rustled quietly above, and that was all. In front of me, standing in the doorway I'd just come through, was the man, his black silhouette almost blending into the darkness behind him. I stared at him, frozen and helpless like a deer in headlights. He simply stood for what felt like hours before moving his arm to the metal door, just as he had back inside. He balled his hand and gave the door 2 solid, slow knocks. Then he turned and the black silhouette slipped back into the shadows. I walked in agonizing pain back to the security trailer, my entire leg throbbing in pain as I tried to move as quickly as I could. I kept trying to radio for George, but even outside, the walkie couldn't reach him. When the trailer came into view, something immediately seemed wrong. The lights inside were off. The flood lamp that was pointed down onto our security car had gone out as well. The place seemed lifeless and empty, just like the rest of the factory. Crap, I muttered under my breath as I hobbled up the stairs and through the door. The room was cold, dark, and almost devoid of sound. George's usual early morning radio show had been replaced with white static, and in the office chair, hand grasping his chest, was George. He was heaving heavily, his eyes terrified as they rolled over to meet my own. I nearly nearly fell again as I hurried to his side. "George, what happened? I'm calling 911. It's going to be okay, I promise," I insisted, my months of working the front desk at an urgent care coming right back to me. I grabbed the phone off the desk and with trembling fingers dialed 911. I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen it more times than I'd like to admit. George was having a heart attack. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. Harmon Regional Hospital was only a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime had passed as I tried to keep the man conscious. He never spoke, focusing all his efforts on breathing as I kept repeating over and over. We sat in the dark, with the sound of the radio static the only thing breaking the silence of the desolate property. Paramedics swung the door open, followed by the police who quickly took over the scene. George was moved onto a stretcher, his almost limp body carried out of the room. The paramedics took us both to the hospital, the police giving me a ride in the back of their cruiser. "So, what happened to you, kid? You look like you just went through hell," the officer asked as we pulled out behind the ambulance. My face was slumped against the glass, watching the desolate factory slowly disappear behind the trees. I tripped down the stairs inside one of the buildings, twisted my ankle and fell on the pavement, I said softly. "Thought you guys don't go inside unless there's suspicion of trespassing," he recalled. "Yeah, I thought I heard something inside, but didn't find anyone. Probably was just an animal," I tried to say, the words barely able to trickle out of my mouth. "Right. Guess you guys get a lot of that. Just so you know, if you think someone could be in there, we can investigate. I can have officers inside and—" "No," I insisted, a renewed energy in my voice. I couldn't imagine having any other soul enter that place, and I certainly wouldn't have it happen because of me. It was an animal. You don't need to have anyone go in there. Trust me." Alright, if you say so, kid, if you say so. I told my father the same thing when he and my mother made it to the hospital. My mom was just relieved I was alright. I looked worse than I really was, despite the cuts, bruises, and boot I got put on my foot for the next 2 weeks. My father looked at me differently, however. He was all smiles, glad I was safe, and said he was sorry I had to go through the whole ordeal. But there was something else in his eyes I couldn't quite place. Mannerisms that didn't quite match. I didn't really understand it, and at the moment I didn't really care to, but I do now. I was back on the job after the boot came off. My dad got one of his other guys to cover the factory with George out of commission. He lived through the heart attack, but never went back to work at that factory. He never told a soul what happened in the time he was alone either, and I did the same. Not until right now. I worked for my father's company for a year and a half, and there are many things that I never understood about what would happen on that job. Long after the knocker, as I started to call him, but whatever happened always stayed there. And I didn't. Now I'm happy to say I don't have to work the nights. I don't even work in security. I live with my girlfriend Emma 2 states away, and I've been happy. Money is good, relationship is good, life is good. My time working as a watchman doesn't even cross my mind. It's always been covered up by something better. But last night I woke up in the middle of the night. Emma was still asleep, her dirty blonde hair having fallen over her face as she slept facing me. I couldn't help but smile. She always looked funny when she slept. I stretched a little under the covers as I adjusted and got ready to shut my eyes again. I let out a long breath before settling in again, rolling over and shutting my eyes. But just as quickly as they shut, they were quickly wide open again. I heard a knock on the glass, and then another, and then more. They were delicate but purposeful, almost rhythmic. It lasted almost 10 minutes and ended in the same way, a shave and a haircut. I've spent the entire day today trying to figure out what caused it. Wasted my entire Sunday. I tore the house apart and checked every inch of the exterior, every bush, every tree, anything that could reproduce the knock, but it was a dead end at every turn. In the back of my mind, I knew I was simply delaying the answer I already knew was right. Emma thinks I'm going crazy trying to find the source of a knock that wasn't even loud enough to wake her up, but she doesn't understand and I don't intend to explain it to her. Not yet anyway. I'm afraid to go to sleep tonight. I don't know what will happen. Maybe nothing, maybe the same thing, maybe something worse. The unknown worries me because the knocker isn't the worst thing I encountered on that job. And as much as he terrifies me, there are much bigger fish in the sea. It all started last week on a quiet evening when I was scrolling through my phone. My storage was full, so I began the tedious task of deleting old photos. But then something caught my eye. A photo album titled Sleep Well, one I didn't remember creating, appeared on the screen. The creation date was from the night before, just hours earlier. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I opened it. Inside was a picture of me taken while I slept, vulnerable, unaware. The angle of the shot was disturbingly specific, as if the photographer had been hiding just out of view. Their presence felt only in the eerie stillness of the moment. The most disturbing detail: the picture was taken from inside my closet. I live alone. My heart dropped. I could feel the color draining from my face as a heavy pressure squeezed my chest. I was being watched. My eyes instantly darted toward the closet. As I trembled in fear, I wondered, was someone inside it? I don't know. I was too scared to look. In a panic, I immediately grabbed my car keys from beside the bed, rushed to the front door, and drove straight to the police. I arrived at the police station, feeling a strange sense of relief just for making it there. I told them everything that happened and showed the picture. The officers listened, then agreed to send someone to search my house. They searched every inch: closets, drawers, windows, nothing. No signs of break-ins, no clues that anyone had been there. The police told me to change my locks, install security cameras, and keep in touch in case something else happened, but it didn't feel like enough. I was terrified. The idea of someone watching me, of someone being inside my closet, haunted me. That night, I opened the closet fully, convinced that if I could see inside, I could rid myself of the fear. But something felt off. I could still feel the presence, like someone was right there, just beyond my sight. The weight of paranoia suffocated me. Unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I called my friend Melissa and told her what happened. With my voice shaking, I made myself some popcorn and went back upstairs to my room. Still talking to her, trying to sound calm, I noticed something wrong. I stopped mid-sentence. My breath hitched. The closet door that I had left wide open was now closed, but not fully. There was a slight gap, a narrow sliver, just enough for me to know that someone or something was inside. I couldn't see who or what, but I could feel it. The pressure of being watched. My eyes locked on the gap, heart hammering in my chest. Then I saw it. A single wide eye staring back at me from the darkness. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Hello, are you still there?" Melissa asked, confused by my sudden silence. I couldn't answer. My body was frozen. Someone was inside the closet. I was sure of it. I slowly pulled my bedroom door shut, my hands shaking as I gripped the doorknob. I locked it. Then, with my heart racing, I ran outside and called the police as I stood in my yard, too terrified to go back in. When the officer arrived, I rushed to explain. I locked them in my room, I swear. They're in the closet. They were watching me. The officers moved quickly, their hands steady, trained. They entered my room, opened the closet door, and nothing, no one. The closet was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. The room was on the second floor with windows secured by metal bars. No exit, no secret passage. The officer returned to me, his face tight with frustration, his politeness wearing thin. "Ma'am, I know you're scared, but you can't call us every time you forget you closed your closet door. Be sure to only call us when you're certain it's an emergency. I suggest you sleep somewhere else until you've recovered from this panic." "What, are you sure you searched everything?" "They must have escaped," I said, my voice trembling with remorse and disbelief. I felt the walls closing in. How could they have missed something? How could they not see it? "As I said, the house is empty," the officer replied, his tone cold and dismissive. I felt my frustration growing. This wasn't right. There was someone there. I couldn't shake the feeling, the cold certainty gnawing at me. No, you have to believe me. There was someone in there. I locked the door, I swear. There's no way they could have gone anywhere. My house is locked down. Please search again," I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. The officer gave me a long look, clearly fed up. "Ma'am, we've been over this. The house is empty. Nothing's here. I suggest you take a step back and calm down. We can't keep coming back every time you think someone's in your closet." His words hit me like a slap, each one a cold dismissal of everything I had experienced. I stared at him, fighting to hold back tears. But I saw them. I saw their eye. "Get some rest," he cut me off, turning on his heel. "We're done here." Reluctantly, I followed the officer's advice and went to sleep at Melissa's house. She's my best friend, and being with her felt like the only place I could be safe, at least for that night. Melissa tried to lighten the mood, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Are you sure this picture isn't just some joke from someone messing with your head?" I forced a weak laugh, but it was hollow. "Number, I'm sure about what I saw. There's someone watching me." I didn't want to talk much. My mind was racing, but the words wouldn't come. I hadn't been able to explain it properly to the police, and now I couldn't explain it to her. The fear was too real. Melissa's husband was out of town, so I ended up sleeping next to her. I was too scared to sleep alone. That night, I finally felt a little safer, a little less alone. The next morning, things felt better. Being with my closest friend gave me a sense of comfort. I ate breakfast, tried to distract myself, but there was one thing I couldn't shake. The picture. I had to know. I had to see it again. Melissa asked, "Can you show me the picture picture again. I didn't want to look at it, but I opened my gallery anyway. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. I stared at the album for a moment before clicking on it. My stomach dropped. There was another picture in the album, a new one. I zoomed in. I couldn't believe it. It was a picture of me, but this time I wasn't alone. Melissa was lying beside me, just like the night before, but the perspective was wrong. It was too close. Whoever took the picture was right next to us, and in their hand they were holding something, a rag doll. The doll looked just like me, the same dark hair, the same clothes, the exact same features. Even the expression on its face mirrored mine. The doll was lying in the same position I was, as if it had been placed there beside me, sleeping. In the background I saw the shadow of who took the picture. My heart stopped. My hand shook as I dropped the phone. The safety I had felt with Melissa was gone. All that comfort I had wrapped myself in vanished, replaced with a cold, suffocating fear. I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe anywhere. Melissa tried to calm me down, but it wasn't working. My panic was too overwhelming, and she could see that I was shaking, unable to catch my breath. Desperate to understand what was happening, she quickly reached down and grabbed my phone from the floor. Her fingers trembled as she opened the photo album, her eyes scanning the picture I had just shown her. Okay, this doesn't make any sense, she muttered, her voice tight with confusion. She looked at me, then back at the photo. Her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of it, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Are you sure this isn't just some sick prank? Something someone's been sending you? Maybe an ex or someone you know? I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. No, Melissa, I swear, it's not a prank, this is real. Someone's in my life, and they're watching me. Her expression faltered for a moment, and I saw her hesitate, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if she could feel the weight of something watching her too. Slowly, she handed the phone back to me, but this time I noticed her hand was shaking. Do you think they could be here too, in my house? She asked quietly, her voice laced with a hint of fear. I swallowed hard, my own breath catching in my throat. I don't know, but I don't feel safe anymore. I don't think I'm safe anywhere. Melissa's eyes widened slightly, and she stood up from the bed looking around the room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know, I heard some noises last night, but I thought it was just the house settling. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to worry you. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. For the first time I realized I wasn't the only one feeling watched. I think we need to check the house just in case, she said, her voice trembling as she grabbed her phone, preparing to call someone for help. Her eyes were wide, her body tense, as she waited for my response. Melissa looked at me, her face pale with concern. We need to go to the police, she said, her voice firm despite the obvious fear in her eyes. You can't keep dealing with this alone. If someone's really doing this to you, they need to know. I shook my head, a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. The police won't believe me, Melissa. I've already been there. They searched my house and found nothing. They said I'm just imagining things. They don't take me seriously. Melissa's face softened, but her voice remained steady as she reached for my hand. Number. This time it's different. We have proof, remember? She looked at the photo on my phone, her eyes scanning it once more before locking with mine. They can't just ignore that. I hesitated. The memory of the police officer dismissing me echoed in my mind, but Melissa was right. We had proof and I couldn't just let this go. Alright, I said, voice barely above a whisper, but if they don't believe me again, we'll make them believe you, she said, determination in her tone. We'll show them the photo, everything. We have to do something. I arrived at the police station feeling a mix of dread and urgency. As soon as I walked in, I saw the same officer from the night before. When he saw me, his face immediately twisted into a scowl. He was not happy to see me again. He didn't even bother to greet me. You again, he muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes. Officer, we need your help, I started, holding my phone up with the picture. Please, I'm telling you, someone's been taking pictures of me while I sleep. He glanced at the photo, his patience already running thin. You're still going on about this? He rubbed his forehead, clearly annoyed. I already told you, there's no sign of a break-in, no evidence of anyone being inside your house. What do you want me to do? Investigate every closet in the city? I could feel the knot of fear tightening in my chest as I desperately tried to explain. But you don't understand, this picture, it's not just a prank. Someone's still watching me. Melissa, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We don't have any more evidence, but we've checked everything. The house is empty, but she's still seeing things. This picture... The officer cut her off with a harsh wave of his hand. Enough with the photo. photo, he snapped, clearly not believing either of us. I've already done my part. If you two are gonna waste my time, I suggest you find another way to deal with this. He took a deep breath, then sighed in frustration, clearly not wanting to deal with this anymore. Alright, he said, I'll go to your place and search your house again, but don't expect me to find anything. The officer came with us, walking into Melissa's house like it was just another job. He searched every room with annoyance, even though we had already checked everything ourselves. We stood in the living room, the tension growing as we waited for him to come out. When he finally emerged from the last room, his face was contorted with anger. There's nothing here, he said sharply. No sign of a break-in. No one's been here, so stop wasting my time. I couldn't hold it in anymore. But the closet, someone was in there. They're still watching me. Please, you have to understand, I'm not making this up. He shot me an angry look, his voice turning cold. I've been through your house and I haven't found a damn thing. You really think I've got time for some prank, some sick joke? You two think this is funny? Melissa and I exchanged a look, both of us trying to process the officer's words. My heart sank as I realized the officer was done taking us seriously. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice laced with frustration. I'm not going to keep playing along with this. No more emergency calls. You two should find a way to get some rest instead of dragging me into your delusions. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving us standing in the middle of the room, shocked and speechless. The door slammed behind him with a finality that made my whole body tense up. Melissa just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Silence. Complete silence filled the room as Melissa and I stood there in disbelief. I need to go home. It's watching me, not you. Me being here is just putting you in danger, I said with my eyes welling up with tears. Are you crazy? I'm not letting you go anywhere until we catch this person. You're my best friend, I love you, and I'll go through hell to help you, Melissa said, hugging me tightly. Her words were comforting, but fear still consumed me. I honestly didn't know what I would do without her. I'm not sleeping tonight, I said, my voice firm. But remember, you have work tomorrow, Melissa reminded me. Work. How could I possibly work and pretend like nothing happened after everything I'd experienced? The fear was slowly turning into anger. I spent the whole day thinking about what happened, feeling like I was being watched everywhere I went. Melissa called her boss and told him she was sick so she could stay with me. I love her. We spent the entire day coming up with theories about what was going on. Maybe whatever was watching me wasn't human. Nah, I don't believe in supernatural stuff, but Melissa kept insisting. Nighttime came. As I said, I refused to sleep. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I could. But Melissa couldn't stay awake for long. I felt exposed with her asleep, but I wasn't about to wake her up. I just had to stay awake, and that's exactly what I did. Hours passed and nothing happened. The only thing I could hear was Melissa's soft snoring. But time felt agonizingly slow and my fear only grew. 3 a.m., the so-called haunted hour that makes both adults and children alike dread what might happen next. Even though I didn't believe in supernatural things, when I saw 3 o'clock on the clock, my heart sank. I was expecting something, some noise, a reflection, a doll, or the most disturbing thing I could imagine. But nothing happened. 20 minutes went by and I started to feel extremely sleepy, but I knew as soon as I slept, I wouldn't be safe anymore. I glanced at Melissa. Something felt off. She wasn't snoring anymore. She had turned to the other side and I could only see her brown hair splayed across the pillow. I froze. Something about her posture made me uneasy. I had never seen her sleep like that before. Slowly I sat up, my heart racing in my chest. I lifted my head and cautiously leaned forward to see if she was awake, but when I looked, my blood ran cold. What I saw was not my best friend anymore. There in front of me was a body. The skin was unnaturally pale, the once vibrant brown hair now a tangled mess. Her mouth hung slightly open and her eyes, those eyes that I knew so well, were wide open but lifeless, glazed over with an unsettling emptiness. The way her limbs were arranged, twisted unnaturally at odd angles, told me she hadn't just fallen asleep. Number something had happened to her. I wanted to scream. My throat closed up. I reached out and desperately shook her, calling her name, trying to wake her, but there was no response. Her body was cold, stiff. I tried again, harder this time. Nothing. No breath, no movement. Melissa was dead. Panic surged through my veins, my vision blurry with tears. I fumbled for my phone, trying to dial emergency services, but just as my fingers brushed the screen, something stopped me. An airdrop request flashed across the top of my phone. My heart dropped. I hesitated, staring at the screen, the dread tightening in my chest. I wanted to deny the request, to throw my phone away, to make it all stop, but I couldn't. My mind screamed at me to say no, but my hand moved on its own. I accepted. A flood of pictures appeared on my phone, and my stomach twisted. The images were of me, sleeping, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, scattered over weeks. Some were taken inside my closet, others were shots of me lying in my bed, blissfully unaware. But what made my blood run even colder were the ones that came after. There was a picture of me sleeping beside something on the bed. It looked like the same doll I had seen before, but this time it felt different, wrong. It wasn't just a doll anymore. It was me, or something that had been made to look like me, in doll form, lying beside me. The most disturbing part, the shadow of someone standing just behind it, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. The air around me grew thick, suffocating, and then, through the crack in the door, I saw it. A figure, tall and unnervingly still. It was standing there as if waiting, watching. But the most terrifying part was the eye. That single wide eye staring directly at me from the shadows. It was unnatural, too large, too black. No light reflected off of it. It was like a hole in the world, a deep, endless void that seemed to pull every ounce of warmth and life from the room. The eye twitched just slightly, as if it recognized me, like it had been waiting for me to look. And in its other hand, the doll. But it wasn't just any doll. The doll was me. I recognized the face immediately, its pale skin, the dark hair, the same expression I often wore when I slept. But it was wrong. The doll's eyes were wide open, fixed in a grotesque stare, its mouth frozen in a twisted, silent scream. Its body, rigid and contorted in a way that a human body never could be, seemed to mock me, like an unnatural imitation of myself. The figure held it with such tenderness, as if cradling it, but there was something deeply disturbing in the way it did. The doll's hand was positioned just like mine when I slept, but there was no softness to it, no warmth. And then, the figure stepped forward, the eye never leaving mine. The room grew colder and the figure moved silently, like a shadow creeping closer, carrying the doll as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I felt the terror clawing at me, suffocating me, but I couldn't look away from that horrible, hollow eye. It was as if it was looking through me, and the more I stared, the more I felt like I was becoming part of its dark, empty world. I could feel my body shutting down, my heart thundering in my chest as if it was trying to escape my ribs. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my breathing shallow and erratic. My limbs felt weak, like they were made of stone, and my vision started to blur around the edges. The air felt like it was closing in, pressing against me from all sides, and the figure, the eye, was all I could see. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, louder and louder, drowning everything else out until the sound was all-consuming. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything went black. I'm currently writing this on a contraband cell phone in prison, after allegedly poisoning my best friend. It's all a lie, of course. They say I did it, but they don't understand. They don't know what I saw, what really happened. Melissa is gone. I can still feel the weight of that truth crushing me. I can still hear her laugh, see her smile, feel her presence beside me like I always did. I feel the coldness now. It's unbearable. Losing her, it's like losing a part of myself. The world feels hollow, like it's spinning around me without any meaning. The grief is suffocating, but the worst part isn't the grief, it's the frustration, the anger bubbling inside me. They think I did it, they think I'm the one who poisoned her. They don't see how broken I am, how lost I feel. They don't understand that I would never hurt her. I would never do something like that, but it doesn't matter what I say. They have their own version of the truth, and now they've locked me away for something I didn't do. They'll never know what really happened. They'll never know what I saw in that room, what I saw in her eyes before everything turned dark. I couldn't escape before. Now, I certainly can't. They've got me here in this cold metal cage, but maybe I can. There's still one thing I can do. I'm the only one who could put an end to this, to everything. The figure is still watching me, I can feel it. That same eye, always lurking, always waiting. It's still out there haunting me. I thought maybe, just maybe, being locked up would give me a break from the constant fear, but no, it follows me. It's always watching. I don't know how long I can keep going, how long I can pretend that I'm okay. I can't take it anymore. The nightmares, the paranoia, the guilt, they all blur together. I miss Melissa. I miss her so much. I love you, Melissa. I always will. I can't wait to join you. I need to write this down. I don't know if it's for my own sanity or as some kind of warning, maybe both. Typing helps ground me, makes the shaking in my hands a little less noticeable. The doctors keep telling me I'm experiencing a psychotic break, but the puncture wounds on my back and the darkening birthmark on my palm tell a different story. My dad turned 63 yesterday. We always throw him a party at his house, the same house I grew up in. It's tradition. This year, something changed, something that had been waiting precisely 63 years. Family traditions are just rituals we don't question. That's what Dad always said whenever I asked why we had to keep doing the same things year after year. His eyes would always drift away when he said it, like he was remembering something he'd rather forget. Dad wasn't always this cryptic. Before Mom vanished, he was different, warmer, more present. We used to fish together on weekends, his calloused hands patiently untangling my line when I'd snarl it. Those hands would tremble slightly whenever his birthday approached, though I didn't understand why until now. After Mom disappeared, fishing stopped. The only constant that remained was his insistence on the birthday ritual, always on the exact day, never postponed, never altered. Even when I was finishing my master's thesis, even when he was recovering from pneumonia 3 years ago, the party had to happen exactly as it always had. The house itself sits back from the road, nestled in about 5 acres of dense woods, lush and green in the spring, blazing with color in the fall, but somehow always holding shadows deeper than they should be. After Mom vanished, I'd sometimes catch Dad staring out at those woods at dusk, whispering something under his breath. Once, I crept close enough to hear him counting backward from 63. When I'd ask what he was doing, he'd just say, "Keeping track of what's mine." I thought he meant the property. Dad's lived alone since Mom passed 10 years ago. At least that's what we tell people. The truth about Mom's disappearance is something Dad and I never discuss. Just like we never discuss the strange hourglass-shaped birthmark we both share on our left palms, or the fact that neither of us can remember anything about the night she vanished except the smell of ozone and damp earth, and the sound like wet leather being stretched over wooden frames. Sometimes I still hear it in my dreams, that sound, followed by Mom's scream cutting abruptly to silence. The police found one of Mom's shoes by the edge of the woods, just one. It was perfectly clean despite the mud all around it. When they brought cadaver dogs, the animals refused to enter the tree line, whimpering and backing away. One dog, a German Shepherd with an impeccable record, bit his handler when the man tried to force him forward. The search was called off after 3 days. Dad never cried, not once. He just sat in his armchair, rubbing that hourglass mark, staring at nothing. Dad's a creature of habit, and the birthday party is one of the few constants he clings to. Same small group of friends, mostly colleagues from the dusty archives where he worked before retiring. Same Jell-O salad recipe Mom used to make, same slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. I always thought Dad was just honoring Mom's memory with these parties. The familiarity seemed to comfort him. Now I understand it was never celebration, it was obligation. Last week I called Dad to confirm the party details. The conversation was ordinary until I mentioned bringing my new girlfriend Eliza. "No," he said sharply, a panic in his voice I'd never heard before. "No new people, not this year." "Why not? Is everything okay?" His breathing was heavy on the line. "This is a difficult one, son. The 63rd. Best to keep it traditional." What's special about 63? I asked. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, he said, "That's how many they need." When I pressed him, he changed the subject, voice resuming its normal cadence as if the moment of strangeness had never happened. "I didn't invite Eliza. I got there around 6 p.m. on the day of the party. The gravel crunched under my tires like usual, but something felt different. The trees seemed to bend inward, watching, listening. Strings of faded party lights were draped across the porch railings, buzzing with an unnatural persistence, like insects speaking in code. When I killed the engine, the silence that rushed in felt hungry. Before going inside, I noticed something odd. The wind chimes Mom had hung years ago were perfectly still, despite the breeze I could feel on my skin. I touched one. It was ice cold and made no sound, as if it were frozen in time or existing in some different medium than the air around it. Inside, the usual suspects were already mingling. Mr. Henderson, Dad's old boss, looking even more like a bewildered owl than usual. Mrs. Gable from next door, clutching her ubiquitous Tupperware container. A few others whose names always escape me, but whose faces are etched into the memory of dozens of these parties. As I shook hands with each guest, I realized something that sent ice through my veins. Each year they look exactly the same, not not just similar, but identical. I realized with a chill that Mrs. Gable's dress was the exact same one she'd worn to every birthday since I was 15. The small coffee stain on the left sleeve hadn't changed, hadn't faded. It was precisely the same stain. The amber necklace she wore caught the light in the same way, reflecting the same pattern on her collarbone. For a decade, she hadn't aged a day. Dad seemed fine at first, maybe a little tired, but he greeted me with his usual warm hug, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. He was wearing the slightly too loud Hawaiian shirt I got him last year. Everything felt normal. The low murmur of conversation, the clinking of ice in glasses, the smell of roast beef warming in the oven. But beneath it all was something wrong, a discord like music played at the wrong speed. When Dad hugged me, his arms held on a beat too long, his fingers pressing into the spot where my spine meets my neck, as if counting the vertebrae. I pulled away, and for a second, just a flash, his eyes seemed completely black before returning to their familiar hazel. The first crack in the facade was small. I was getting a drink in the kitchen when Mr. Henderson came up beside me. He didn't say hello, just leaned slightly towards the refrigerator, his eyes fixed on the magnets holding up my childhood drawings. I noticed with unease that one drawing, a crayon scribble I'd made at age 6, depicted tall, thin figures standing in a circle around a smaller figure. I didn't remember drawing it. The crayon marks seemed to shimmer slightly, as if freshly applied. "The cycle nears completion," he whispered, his voice dry like rustling leaves. "Your father has served well, but the vessel weakens." I forced a laugh, my throat suddenly tight. "What cycle's that, Mr. Henderson? Getting Dad another year older?" He didn't smile. He just slowly turned his head, his owlish eyes seeming too large behind his thick glasses, pupils contracting to pinpricks despite the dim light. The lineage must continue. The hunger must be fed. A memory surfaced. I was 7, hiding in the hallway past my bedtime, watching Dad and Mr. Henderson bent over old maps spread across the dining table. "The confluence occurs every 63 years, Henderson had said. "That's when the door thins. That's when payment is easiest." Dad had nodded gravely, his finger tracing something on the map I couldn't see. In the memory, Henderson had turned suddenly, looking directly at my hiding place, though I was certain I'd been silent. "The boy already shows the mark," he'd said, "stronger than yours was at his age." Dad had glanced up, his face drawn with a sorrow I couldn't comprehend then. "He won't bear it," Dad had answered firmly. "I'll find another way." Now Henderson straightened up, grabbed a napkin, and walked back into the living room as if nothing had happened, but not before I caught the faintest flicker of something insectile moving beneath the skin of his neck. I reached for my phone to call someone, who I wasn't sure, when I noticed the childhood drawings on the fridge were different. Where had been stick figures and houses, now showed dark, spindly shapes with too many limbs. One showed a crude black candle with a purple flame. Another showed an hourglass with what looked like a tiny figure trapped in each bulb, their mouths open in silent screams. I glanced at my palm, where the hourglass mark seemed darker than usual. I've had it since birth. Dad told me once it meant I was a keeper of time. Mom didn't have one. I remember asking her why when I was small, and she'd looked at Dad with such sadness before answering, "Because I'm not part of the line, sweetheart. I'm just a visitor." Then she'd hugged me so tightly it hurt, whispering into my hair, "But I'd rewrite time itself to keep you safe." Mrs. Gable, setting down her jello salad, lime green as always, caught my eye and gave me this wide, unblinking stare. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It felt stretched, painted on. She held my gaze for an uncomfortably long moment before turning away with a jerky movement that reminded me of stop-motion animation. The jello didn't wobble as she set it down. It remained perfectly still, as if frozen solid, or as if the laws of physics simply didn't apply to it. As more guests arrived, the same faces Dad had known for decades, the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. They greeted Dad with a strange formality, their handshakes lingering, their fingers tracing the hourglass mark on his palm. Their eyes scanned him up and down with an unnerving intensity, like butchers assessing a prime cut. They barely spoke to each other, arranging themselves around the living room in a loose semicircle facing the armchair where Dad usually sat to open presents. They just stood there, waiting. "Dad," I whispered, catching him alone by the hallway. "Something's wrong. These people..." "Not people," he corrected quietly, his eyes darting around the room. For a moment he looked terrified. "Never were. I'm sorry, son. I tried to keep you away from all this. Your mother and I both did. She thought if she..." He stopped abruptly as Mrs. Gable approached. "It's time for cake, Arthur," she trilled, her voice hitting notes that made my teeth ache. Dad nodded, defeated. "Yes, time for cake." The usual cheerful chatter died down. The only sounds were the buzz of the porch lights and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. A clock I suddenly realized I hadn't heard chime all evening. Looking closer, I saw the hands weren't moving, hadn't moved for years based on the dust accumulated on them. Yet the ticking continued, growing louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat accelerating with fear. Dad, caught in the center of their silent attention, started looking uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, tugging at the collar of his Hawaiian shirt. "Well," he said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room, "anyone want to hear about the new bird feeder I put up?" Nobody responded. Their eyes remained fixed on him. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat softly. "Arthur," he said, his voice regaining that dry, papery quality, "it is time." Dad swallowed hard. He looked at me, a flicker of something, horror, resignation, relief in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a weary acceptance that was somehow more frightening than fear. He nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose it is." He glanced at me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I could spare you this. I tried to break the cycle when your mother—" His voice trailed off. A memory hit me like a physical blow. Mom and Dad arguing the night before her disappearance. Mom's voice rising hysterically. "I won't let them have him. You promised we could end this." Dad's response eerily calm. "There is no ending it. Only continuing or transferring. That was the bargain." Mom had slammed her palm against the wall. "Your grandfather's bargain, not yours, not our son's." Dad's face had hardened. "Do you think I wouldn't break it if I could? The door must have a keeper. If not me, then let it be me," Mom had said, her voice suddenly quiet, resolved. "I've found another way." This wasn't part of the birthday tradition, or maybe it was the only true tradition, hidden beneath the veneer of normal celebration all these years. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, carrying not her jello salad, but a small, ornate wooden box I'd never seen before. No, that wasn't true. I had seen it once in the attic when I was 7. Dad had caught me looking at it and forbidden me from ever going into the attic again. The box was carved with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly, patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed peripherally. She placed it on the coffee table in front of Dad. The other guests leaned in slightly, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through dry reeds. "What's going on, Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What is this?" He wouldn't look at me. Just part of getting older, son. Some things you have to accept." He rubbed his hourglass birthmark absently. "Some bargains can't be broken." I felt a sudden stabbing pain in my own palm, looked down to see my birthmark darkening, the edges growing more defined, throbbing in time with my racing heart. Black veins began spiderwebbing outward from it, disappearing beneath my sleeve. The pain was sharp, electric, climbing up my arm like invasive vines. Mr. Henderson gestured towards the box. "Open it, Arthur. Fulfill the pact. Begin the transition. 63 years is complete. The door awaits its keeper." Pact, transition. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. These weren't Dad's friends. They looked like them, sounded mostly like them, but they were hollow, copies. Or maybe they had always been something else, wearing human appearances like ill-fitting suits. Dad's hands trembled as he reached for the box. The lid wasn't hinged. It lifted straight off. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, wasn't a gift. It was a single, large black candle. Its wax strangely iridescent, shifting like oil on water. There was also a small obsidian knife, sharp and wickedly curved. The blade seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Dad, no," I pleaded, starting to stand up. Instantly, two of the other guests, men I vaguely recognized from Dad's bowling league, moved smoothly to flank me, their hands resting lightly on my shoulders. Their touch was cold, impossibly strong, fingers too long and jointed in too many places. I couldn't move. Panic seized me. "It's all right, son," Dad said, his voice sounding distant, strained. "It's the only way to keep things balanced, to feed what waits below. It's been this way since your great-grandfather found the door in the woods in 1835, the one that should never have been opened." "Like Mom tried to close it?" I asked, sudden understanding dawning. "That's what happened to her, isn't it? She tried to break the pact." Dad's eyes flashed with grief. "No one breaks the pact. She thought she could substitute herself, offer herself instead of us, but they refused her. They've always wanted our bloodline, the marked ones." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They took her anyway, as punishment." Mr. Henderson produced a match, struck it against the box. The flame flared unnaturally bright in the dimming light filtering through the windows. I noticed with horror that outside, though it should have been early evening, the sky had gone completely black. Not the darkness of night, but a void, starless and absolute. The match's flame cast no shadows despite its brightness. He lit the black candle. It didn't smell like wax, it smelled like ozone, like damp earth, like something metallic and old. The flame wasn't yellow or orange, it burned with a deep violet light that cast long dancing shadows that moved against the direction of the flame's flicker. The shadows formed shapes on the wall, elongated figures with too many limbs, contorting in what might have been dance or agony. And I remembered something else. Being 5 years old, waking from a nightmare where tall creatures with too many joints danced around my bed. Dad had come in, seen my terror, and shown me his palm. "We see them because of this," he'd said, pointing to his hourglass mark. "We're the only ones who can. That's our burden, our gift." "The offering," Mrs. Gable prompted, her stretched smile wider now, splitting her face unnaturally. As she spoke, I glimpsed something behind her teeth, a darkness, a void similar to the one that had replaced the sky. Dad picked up the obsidian knife. His knuckles were white. He looked down at his own hand, resting on the arm of the chair, at the hourglass birthmark that now pulsed an angry red. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and made a swift, shallow cut across his palm, directly through the mark. I tried to cry out, but the hand on my shoulder tightened, squeezing the air from my lungs. My own birthmark burned in sympathy, the pain spreading up my arm as if my veins were filling with acid. Dad didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He held his bleeding hand over the candle's violet flame. As the first drop of blood hit the flame, it didn't sizzle. It flared, sending purple sparks into the air that hung suspended, forming momentary constellations of unknown meaning. And the guessed, they changed. It wasn't instantaneous, more like a slow motion distortion. Their faces seemed to lengthen, their eyes sinking into shadow, their mouths stretching into impossible, hungry grins filled with too many teeth. The familiar forms flickered, revealing something gaunt, elongated, and wrong underneath. The air grew cold, carrying the scent of decay and something else. Something like stagnant pond water and electricity and time itself gone stale. They weren't human. They had never been human. They began to hum, a low guttural sound that vibrated in my bones. It wasn't music. It was resonance, ancient and terrifying. It was the sound I'd heard in nightmares all my life. The sound I think Mom must have heard the night she disappeared. The sound of something vast and patient, stirring beneath reality. As the humming intensified, I noticed something horrifying. The walls of the living room were becoming transparent, revealing not the expected wooden framework, but a vast, impossible space beyond. A landscape of twisted, impossible geometry, where massive, shadowy forms moved with deliberate purpose around what looked like an enormous door, its surface carved with the same symbols as the wooden box. Through the transparent floor, I could see it wasn't dirt or foundation beneath us, but a chasm that stretched downward forever, pulsing with violet light. And Dad was changing too. The weariness fell away from him. His eyes, fixed on the violet flame, began to glow with the same unnatural light. His skin seemed to tighten over his bones, taking on a grayish, translucent quality. The lines on his face deepened, looking less like wrinkles and more like carved glyphs, forming patterns similar to those on the box. His joints began to shift, bones lengthening and realigning with sickening wet cracks. He wasn't my dad anymore, he was becoming one of them, the vessel being prepared. The blood dripped steadily into the flame, each drop met with a flare and an intensification of the humming. The figures around him swayed, their shadowy forms seeming to draw sustenance from the ritual, from my father's offering, from his transformation. I finally understood. This wasn't a birthday party, it was maintenance, a feeding, a renewal of whatever pact Dad had made or inherited or been forced into generations ago. These weren't his friends celebrating his life, they were something else, ensuring their connection, their hold, ensuring the cycle continued. The blood, that's why it had to be exactly 63 years, one drop for each year, sustaining whatever lay beyond that door until the keeper could be properly prepared. And as my birthmark burned hotter, I realized with sickening clarity that I was next. The lineage continues. The hunger must be fed. Something inside me rebelled. This wouldn't be my fate. I wouldn't become whatever Dad was becoming. Wouldn't feed whatever ancient thing lurked beneath our family legacy. I thought of Mom, who had tried to save us, who had given herself to protect me from this moment. Terror gave me a surge of adrenaline. I twisted violently, shoving backward against the unyielding grips. One hand slipped just enough. I scrambled, falling over over a footstool, kicking out blindly. I connected with something hard, a knee, and heard a sharp crack, followed by a hiss that didn't sound remotely human. The humming stopped. Every elongated head snapped towards me, their glowing eyes filled with cold, ancient malice. The illusion was gone completely now. They were monsters wearing the borrowed skins of my father's acquaintances, skin that now hung loose in places, revealing glimpses of something chitinous and segmented underneath. And the thing in the armchair, the thing that was no longer my father, slowly turned its head. Its eyes burned violet. A low growl rumbled in its chest, but I saw something flicker behind those inhuman eyes. A last remnant of my father, fighting to the surface one final time. "Run," it rasped, the voice gravelly, layered, barely recognizable. "They don't want you yet, but they will. The door in the woods, find it, close it. Your mother found a way, in her journal, under the floorboards in your old room." Its voice contorted into an inhuman shriek as the others turned toward it, their attention momentarily diverted from me. Mom's journal. She'd been trying to break the cycle all along. I didn't need telling twice. I crab-walked backwards, scrambled to my feet, and bolted for the kitchen door. The cold hand snatched at me, ripping my sleeve. Something sharp, a claw, raked across my back. I screamed but didn't stop moving. I slammed through the back door, into the suffocating darkness of the woods, not daring to look back. I ran until my lungs burned and tears streamed down my face. Strange whispers followed me through the trees, and more than once I glimpsed thin, impossibly tall figures moving parallel to my path, always just beyond the range of clear sight. The darkness wasn't natural, no stars, no moon, just absolute blackness broken only by brief flashes of violet light that illuminated nothing. Then I saw it, a clearing I'd never noticed before, though I'd played in these woods all my childhood. In the center stood a massive ancient oak tree, its trunk split down the middle, creating a gap that looked almost like a doorway. Inside that gap was only darkness, but it wasn't empty. It moved, pulsed, breathed. The air around it rippled like heat waves, and the smell of ozone was overwhelming. The door in the woods. What great-grandfather had found, what Mom had tried to close. As I approached, I could feel its pull, a gravity that tugged not at my body, but at something deeper, something connected to the mark on my palm. The darkness inside the split trunk seemed to recognize me, to hunger for me specifically. It knew my bloodline, it knew the hourglass mark. It had been waiting. But before I could approach it further, a deafening chorus of those humming voices rose from behind me. I glanced back to see a procession of the elongated figures emerging from the tree line, led by the thing that had been my father. They were coming for me to complete what they'd started, to ensure the lineage continued. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, collapsing onto the asphalt, gasping for air. Above me, the sky was normal again. Dusky evening, stars just beginning to emerge. A car swerved to avoid me, horn blaring. Normal sounds. Normal world. As if a membrane separated this reality from the nightmare I'd just escaped. I called the police from my cell. I told them, I don't even know what I told them. A home invasion, a psychotic break. They sent a cruiser to the house. They found it empty. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no black candle, just leftover roast beef, a half-eaten jello salad, and faded party lights buzzing on the porch. The officer gave me a concerned look as he described the scene, clearly thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. There was one weird thing though, he admitted reluctantly. All the clocks in the house had stopped, every single one showing 6:13 p.m. The exact time Dad had cut his palm. Dad is missing. His friends are unreachable, their numbers disconnected, their home standing empty as if no one had lived there for years. The police think Dad wandered off, maybe had a health episode. They look at me with pity, thinking I'm hysterical from grief and stress. But I know what I saw, I know what they are, and I know that Dad didn't just wander off. He was renewed, prepared for another cycle, transformed into something that serves whatever waits behind that door in the woods. I haven't been back to the house, I can't, but I need to. Mom's journal is there, under the floorboards. The answer to breaking the cycle might be in those pages. The answer to saving Dad, if anything of him remains, and maybe even Mom. Sometimes late at night, I think I see movement in the woods behind my own apartment. Tall, thin shadows flickering between the trees. Watching, waiting, patient. I've started keeping track of how many I see each night. Always 63. Never more, never less. The hourglass birthmark on my palm has begun to darken, the edges growing more defined each day. Black veins spread from it now, reaching past my wrist. Sometimes I wake up with the taste of ozone in my mouth and dirt under my fingernails, though I haven't left my apartment. Last night, I found a small wooden box outside my door. I didn't open it. I have started researching my family history, looking for clues about this door in the woods Dad mentioned. The librarian gave me an odd look when I requested the county's oldest maps and land surveys. Funny, she said, your father used to research the same things. As she handed me the maps, I noticed something on her palm as her sleeve pulled back, the faintest outline of an hourglass. When she saw me looking, she quickly pulled her sleeve down, but not before I saw the black veins spreading up her arm. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "When's your birthday?" she asked, her voice too light, too casual. I didn't answer. I just took the maps and left. But as I reached the library door, I heard her whisper, "Time is running out for all of us." Back in my apartment, I spread the maps across my kitchen table. The oldest one, dated 1835, showed something that made my blood run cold. The woods behind our house were marked with a symbol, a crude hourglass inside a circle, and scrawled in faded ink at the edge of the map, "The confluence, the door, the bargain is made." The same year my great-grandfather supposedly found the door. I don't know what the pact was. I don't know what happens when the cycle is complete. All I know is that my dad's birthday party didn't go as planned. Or maybe it went exactly as they planned all along. Whatever my father became, whatever door he opened or failed to close, I'm afraid the cycle isn't finished. I'm afraid it's just beginning again. With me. Update. I found something in my mailbox this morning. A single black candle and a note in handwriting that isn't quite my father's. "The door waits for you. The lineage continues. Happy birthday, son." My birthday isn't for another 6 months, but now I understand. It's not about my calendar birthday, it's about when I was marked, when the hourglass appeared on my palm, 63 days from now. Update 2. I went back to the house last night. I found Mom's journal exactly where Dad said it would be. Most pages are filled with research, historical accounts of disappearances in these woods, astronomical calculations, and diagrams of the door. But the last entry stopped mid-sentence. The cycle can be broken if the keeper offers not blood but the rest of the page was torn away, but tucked into the binding of the journal was a photograph I'd never seen before. Mom standing in front of the split oak tree, her hand pressed against the darkness within it. Her eyes were closed in concentration, her lips forming words I couldn't read, and on her palm, visible and clear, an hourglass mark that hadn't been there before. She found a way to take the mark, to become a keeper without being born to it. She tried to break the cycle by transferring it to herself. And now I hear something scratching at my apartment door. The hourglass on my palm is burning. They found me, but they've made one mistake. They left the candle, and I think I know what Mom was trying to write. The cycle can be broken if the keeper offers not blood but fire. Somehow I found a spot in the tunnel with enough service to, hopefully, get this post out. I'm holding on to the singular bar for dear life. My situation is growing dire. I'm running out of gas, which also means I won't be able to charge my phone. The only food I have is a bag of Sour Patch Kids, a box of Cheez-Its, 2 Red Bulls, and about a half gallon of water. Let me explain what's going on. I'm a traveler, always have been. I'm used to cross-country road trips. I'm located in the United States, driving for hours through the night without stopping, except to use the restroom or grab a quick meal. I'm currently making the trek from Los Angeles to Chicago. I've done this trip before, but I took Route 66 that time for the hell of it. This time, I opted to take the interstates, a shorter ride and a way I haven't taken before. This way cuts through the middle of the country, passing through Colorado and Nebraska and Iowa. The drive was going normal, lots of nothingness. I'm used to going hours without seeing any other cars or people when I'm driving out here. By the time I'm writing this, I've been driving for close to 3 days. Last night I slept in a Walmart parking lot somewhere in Colorado, I think Frisco. I drove for over 14 hours straight yesterday, only stopping a couple of times at gas stations to grab snacks, take a piss, and refuel. I grabbed dinner at a Taco Bell at like midnight before I crashed. I'm recounting every detail because I'm hoping that maybe this whole thing could be explained away by a lack of sleep and nutrition. I know I should be eating and sleeping more, but I just don't think about it when I'm on the road. I don't think about anything. That's why I love these trips so much. Anyways, I woke up this morning at the crack of dawn, like 6 a.m. in Colorado, which is 5 a.m. my time, and continued on my way. I wanted to make good time, not for any reason. It's not like I had plans. I just wanted to see how quickly I could drive so far. I grabbed breakfast at a local cafe, a bagel and a coffee, filled up on gas, grabbed some Red Bulls, some beef jerky, and a gallon of water. Then I headed out. I don't think I stopped driving until like 6 hours in, when I realized I was gonna piss myself from all the energy drinks I chugged. I tend to space out until it's nearly too late. I stopped at the first gas station I saw, 2 measly gas pumps and a rundown old wooden shack for a convenience store. I was somewhere coming up on Kearney, Nebraska, and I had endured another time change, so it was now around 2 p.m. I walked inside and the bell on the door jingled. The man at the cash register jumped, startled by the first sign of life other than his own cigarette-soaked breaths. I asked him if they had a restroom and he grinned. "There's a bucket out back, princess," he said, stifling a chuckle. I stared at him blankly, waiting for a punchline. He sighed and handed me a tarnished key attached to a piece of wood, which had been roughly etched with pisser. He pointed to a door at the far end of the shack. I did my business, though the toilet looked like it hadn't been cleaned since before I was born, and returned the key to the man at the register, who I now noticed had a name tag that read Gus. I turned to leave, but before I could, Gus cleared his throat and asked me, "Where you headed?" I told him Chicago, and he said, "What for?" I told him I didn't really know, just to go, I guess. His eyes lingered on me a moment, almost an uncomfortable amount of time. Then he quickly glanced about the shack before he said, "Well, if you can spare a couple hours, I know of a nice scenic route through the peaks a bit further north." He went on to tell me that this route was only really known to locals, winding through Nebraskan peaks with plenty of lookouts over whatever the hell is in Nebraska. Historically home to booze-filled high school parties, romantic illegal camping rendezvous, and of course its fair share of local folklore legends, like the classic teen lovers murdered during a makeout sesh and the killer was never caught type stuff. It's not like his story really piqued my interest. It's the same stuff you hear about every random scenic route and lookout in every random small town, but that's exactly why I chose to embark upon Gus's route. I'm always so curious to explore the places that locals know and adore in all of the random small towns I wind up in along my travels. It makes me realize how connected we really are. No matter where we are in the world, we live out these parallel lives, experiencing emotions and struggles that so many other people also experience in their own ways. I love finding these spots. I love feeling connected with something, anything. He gave me crude directions, but it seemed simple enough. Continue up Interstate 80 for an hour or two longer until I see a turnoff, a dirt road to my left. Can't miss it. That'll take me where I need to go, according to Gus. I figured that if I didn't see the turnoff, I'd just take the loss. After our conversation, I decided to purchase some snacks: Sour Patch Kids, Cheez-Its, and 2 more Red Bulls, and a pack of menthol cigarettes. I filled up on gas again before leaving. I wasn't sure when the next gas station would be, especially if I found Gus's route, and I continued on my way. I lit a cigarette as I began this next leg of my journey. My mother would kill me for smoking in my car. She'd kill me for a lot of the stuff I do when I take these trips. One thing I started to learn is that Nebraska is full of corn and wheat. In all directions, all I could see were miles and miles of farmland, stalks waving in the wind like a sorry excuse for an ocean. Interstate 80 was surrounded, crops creeping onto the shoulders of the road, refusing to adhere to man-made perimeters. The stalks grew high above my SUV, making it so I could see nothing beyond the confines of my weedy, corny prison. I had been driving for about 2 hours since the gas station when I saw it, a break in the crops to my left. Gus was right, I couldn't miss it. The dirt road stood out like a beacon, a sudden relief from my engulfment. I didn't feel any hesitation to take the path. In fact, I was excited that I had actually stumbled across it. As I made the turn, I could almost feel the stories, the experiences of the people who had made this turn before me. Every local has their spots. In every big city, every small town, every single person has a place that is special to them. A coffee shop, a hiking trail, a park, somewhere they have left pieces of themselves. I want to leave pieces of myself everywhere. The dirt road cut through the fields heading north. Far ahead of me, I could see a small range of peaks and hills. Nothing compared to California's mountain ranges, but at least it wasn't flat like everywhere else is out here. After driving through more and more miles of farmland, eventually I started to ascend. The road curved to my right at the base of the closest peak, turned from dirt into old battered pavement, and I began a twisty, turny ride up and up. As I got higher up the peak, I could see what Gus was talking about. The views were incredible. Plots of farmland, a quilt that covered the earth in greens and tans and yellows. I lit another cigarette and slowly continued my drive. I stopped at a couple of lookouts, just random turnoffs on the side of the road, taking in my surroundings. You can find beauty in anything if you try, even Nebraskan wheat fields. I felt like a local. The road was nothing special, similar to most mountain roads I've taken before. Nothing stood out really, besides some empty bottles and beer cans in the brush. I didn't see a single other person for the entirety of my drive, which I enjoyed. It was just me in the woods and the road. Then I entered the tunnel. I didn't think anything of it. Plenty of mountain roads cut through portions of the mountain itself, causing you to drive through a manufactured hole in the rock. I used to play a game as a kid where I'd hold my breath until we made it through to the other side. I'm glad I didn't try to hold my breath this time. I immediately noticed the tunnel was long. I couldn't see any light coming from the other end. The dirty orange bulbs hanging from the ceiling every 10 feet or so didn't make much of a difference in the pitch black. I drove for about 30 minutes, thinking to myself that this may be the longest tunnel I've ever driven through. Then the lights started diminishing. They began popping up every 30 feet, then every 50 feet, then every 100 feet, then there were none. I drove through the darkness for another 45 minutes, my headlights leading the way. I'd been in the tunnel for over an hour now. It was close to 8 p.m. and I didn't see any signs of the exit. I decided to turn around. I didn't like being swallowed by darkness. The rock walls were closing in on me, reigniting my claustrophobic fears that consumed me as a child. I drove for an hour or so back the direction I came. The lights should have started coming back by now, but they didn't. No orange bulbs. I drove for another hour and another, almost 3 hours driving back the way I came, and I never made it back to the tunnel's entrance. I was never greeted by the warm glow of the dim bulbs. Maybe the lights had gone out, but even then I should have been out of the tunnel hours ago by now. I started getting worried. I was confused. I had turned around, hadn't I? I remembered taking that 3-point U-turn in the narrow tunnel. I had been worried my SUV wouldn't even be able to make the turn and was relieved when it had. I grabbed my phone, but of course, no service. And who would I even call? My angry mother, who would just chew me out for listening to a strange man at a gas station in the first place. I have no friends back home. I'm more inclined to spend my time alone. No relationships, besides an ex who wants me dead. I've only had myself for as long as I can remember. I left on this trip without telling anyone I was leaving, let alone where I'd be. Would anyone even notice I was lost? My mind was racing, looking for a solution as I kept driving. Luckily, my car's good on gas. I was still at half a tank. I just kept going. What else was I supposed to do? After another 2 hours, I was desperate. My gas wouldn't last forever. It was dwindling fast. And when my car gave out, I wouldn't be able to charge my phone either. My only distraction from the void enveloping me was my downloaded Spotify playlists. I needed that to survive. I needed that so I didn't go crazy in here. Out of nowhere, while I was fiddling with my music, I saw a beacon of hope. One single bar. It popped up for a split second. I slammed on my brakes and reversed until I got to the sweet spot. At this point, I didn't care if my mother screamed at me so loud it damaged my phone's speaker. I needed to tell someone what was happening to me. I hovered over her contact for a few seconds before I sighed and clicked call. It didn't even ring, just a horrific beeping that signified no service. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, tears starting to well. I wasn't gonna get stuck out here. I couldn't. My brain wouldn't even consider that an option. I grabbed my phone and got out of the car. An eerie whistling from the wind blowing through the tunnel filled my ears. I climbed on top of my car. Maybe if I stood up here, I could get a call out. It didn't work. The same disheartening beeping rang out over and over, and I groaned. I could feel the anxiety building, my heart pounding against my chest. Then I heard something. It was faint at first, like someone trying to stifle a cough. I thought I imagined it. I stood there listening. Then it happened again, louder. It sounded like a playful shout, like maybe a teenager exploring the tunnel, hooting and hollering with their friends. This is what my mind latched onto. Another sign of life meant I could get out of here. I shouted back, "Hey!" It echoed, bouncing off the cold rock walls, repeating over and over. Then it was uncannily quiet. The wind's whistling stopped and everything went still. All I could hear were my own panicked breaths. Then footsteps. Hundreds of them, running, thumping footsteps, coming from both directions. It shook the ground and made my car wobble. Pebbles tumbled off the walls. I have never felt so weak, so exposed. I almost broke a bone jumping off of the roof of my car and stumbling into my driver's seat at what felt like the speed of light. I slammed the car door and locked it. I laid my seat all the way back and pressed myself against it, wanting so badly to dissolve, to disappear. My car stopped swaying. The quiet returned. I laid there for what must have been an hour, maybe more. Tears caked my face and I couldn't stop shaking. I tried every breathing exercise exercise my therapist had taught me. Nothing could calm me. What was that? I haven't moved. I'm still laying in my driver's seat typing this. It's almost 4 a.m. I have been in this tunnel for almost 10 hours. I thought that maybe if I sat down and wrote out everything that's happened so far, it would help me understand. I still don't understand, but it is helping me to settle down. It's grounding me in my reality. Can someone please figure out where I am? Can someone tell me what's happening? How does a tunnel suddenly extend by miles? Did Gus know about this? Is that why he sent me here? I'm paranoid. What do I do from here? I don't want to get out of my car again. What if they find me? Why did they stop running to me? Did I imagine it in my hungry, exhausted state? I don't think continuing to drive is a good option, but it's really the only option. Eventually my gas is going to run out. Eventually my phone is going to die for good. Eventually I will starve or die of dehydration. I'm conserving the little food and drink I have as much as I can. I'm freaking out. I'm so thankful I bought these cigarettes. I fell asleep at like 8 this morning, kept awake all night by gripping fear. I woke up at 4 p.m. with a start, unsure if my terror was from something real or something I dreamed. Honestly, I usually awaken with a start. I have had chronic nightmares for as long as I can remember. I don't think my trepidation was caused by an outside force. Still in the tunnel, feeling the same as I did yesterday. I don't think I was laced. Another response I kept seeing on my first post was that turning around was a mistake. If we take what Gus said literally, as many of you are, I have to continue through the tunnel to take me where I need to go. Maybe that's why the tunnel extended, keeping me inside until I turn back around. It wants to trick me. It's swallowing me like a pill. So when I woke up today, I turned back around, facing back through the tunnel, hopefully the correct way. My car was slowly running out of gas, less than 1/4 tank. I found a portable charger in my car, thank God, that I charged up as I drove. I need as much time with you all as I can get. I need to feel like I'm still connected to civilization. Every 10 to 15 miles down the tunnel, I would reach another service sweet spot, a split second of a bar before it disappeared once again. It's throwing me a bone. I watched as my gas sensor conspicuously made its way to E. I kept driving past empty for about 30 minutes until my car sputtered and came to a stop in the darkness. I had been driving for about 3 hours. My car stopped near where I had turned around yesterday, I think. I sat there, unsure of what to do next, even though in my heart and in my mind I knew. Something I was dreading. I had to start walking. This must be what it wants. For me to be exposed, no longer protected by the steel frame of my SUV, no longer able to hide or speed away at a sign of danger. I was avoiding giving the tunnel what it wanted. I was terrified that as soon as I stepped out of my vehicle, I would be swarmed by whatever was running at me yesterday. But I had no other choice. I packed a bag with the necessary supplies. All of my food and drink, my portable charger, a blanket, some warm clothes, and a journal and pen in case my phone dies before I get out of here. I still want to be able to document my journey. I also grabbed my emergency flashlight and some extra batteries. I even found an old flare in my car's tool bag, which I took with me, and of course my cigarettes and a lighter. I sat there with my packed bag for a while, building up the courage to open my car door. I took a deep breath, counted down from 10, and on 1, I swung open my door and stepped out onto the road. The wind's eerie whistling surrounded me once again. I pointed my flashlight all around me. It was cold, dark, and damp. Liquid pooled at the base of the rock walls. There was nothing to do but start walking, so I did. Leaving my precious vehicle behind was heartbreaking. That SUV is the one constant I have in my life right now. I walked and walked. I knew that the last time I got a bar was about 2 miles before my car stopped. That meant in 8 miles or so, I would hit another sweet spot, and that's where I would rest. It would probably take me about 3 hours of walking. My flashlight did hardly anything in the pitch black. I could see only about 10 feet in front of me in only a small circle of light. The air felt heavy. It was getting hard to breathe. I jumped at every noise. Pebbles I had happened to kick bouncing along the ground. Water drip drops, even my own footsteps sometimes. I was constantly swiveling my light in all directions, glancing behind me every few seconds, even though I couldn't see anything. I felt like I was being watched, as cliche as it is. I walked for about an hour and a half, telling myself I was halfway to my rest point. I just had to keep pushing. I stopped for a second to retie my shoelaces. As I kneeled down, my flashlight fell out of my pocket and rolled to the other side of the tunnel, light aiming behind me. I watched the light as it rolled. The flashlight hit the wall opposite me with a metallic clink. The beam of light illuminated something pressed against the wall, about 10 feet behind me. A black shadow stood out against the shiny gray rock. It looked like the shape of a person, though elongated and wrong somehow. Someone standing with their face pressed against the wall, arms at their side. I inhaled sharply, trying to act as though I didn't see anything. I didn't want to acknowledge the shape. We all remember what happened the last time I acknowledged a presence in this tunnel. I quickly finished tying my shoes and ran across the tunnel to grab my flashlight. I picked it up and continued briskly walking, away from the figure, away from the menacing mass that stuck to the rock like moss. My heart started racing once again, pounding so hard I worried the sound would echo. Was I being followed, and by what? I kept moving. It almost felt like I was floating. My legs were getting numb from the cold and the trek. I made it to my rest point without another incident. I put on a sweater and sat on the ground, my back against the tunnel wall, wrapping myself in my blanket. The bar had appeared like a sign from God, and I started reading more of your comments, just to hear from someone. I guess eventually I started to hum. It's a habit that my mother had tried beating out of me when I was younger, but no amount of pummeling could stop the music in me. It was always random tunes that I couldn't really place. This time was no different. I hadn't even noticed the melody vibrating in my throat, not until I heard it faintly from my left. Further down the tunnel, the way I had walked from. I stopped my humming, but the tune didn't cease. It kept repeating, and I grew more restless each time. A panic crept over me. I listened intently and realized it didn't even necessarily sound human. It sounded forced, like whatever was repeating my humming had never hummed before. Crackling, gritty, hoarse. Then more joined in, from both directions. A distorted choir I couldn't see was repeating my nonsensical tune over and over. I started imagining what these pitiful tunnel demons could possibly look like. Did they appear as human like I thought the shadow was? Or were they more animalistic? Would my death be quick at their hands? The humming was converging on me, getting closer and closer. I turned off my flashlight and threw my blanket over my head, curling up into a ball, like a toddler avoiding the monster under their bed. I lay there with my eyes closed, focusing on my breathing. In for 6, hold for 6, out for 6. Just like my therapist taught me. The ground trembled, the pebbles skittered around me, the wind picked up speed. After about 5 minutes, the humming came to an abrupt halt. Everything quieted suddenly. A single set of footsteps was approaching me slowly. I was shaking as I heard the figure coming up on me. I remained under my blanket, pressed against the ground and the wall. I scrunched my eyes closed and pictured myself somewhere, anywhere else. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. I sensed the figure lean down. I could hear it breathing directly above me. If this was it, this was it. I accepted my fate. Drops of what I assumed was drool splattered onto the blanket. I heard something lick its lips. I held my breath and thought of every horrible thing I had done throughout my life, and how I would never be able to fix it. How I never made amends with so many of the people I had harmed. How my mother probably wouldn't even notice I was dead, and if she did, she'd probably be relieved. Obviously, whatever it was didn't kill me. It stood there above me, salivating and clicking its tongue for a long, long time. Somehow, I fell asleep. Wake up. I was still wrapped in the blanket, clutching my flashlight and my phone. I had been awakened by that harsh whisper shout that rang in my ears, like when someone screams in a dream and it continues long after you open your eyes. I listened, but I heard nothing more. I slowly lifted the edge of the blanket and peeked out. My eyes began adjusting to the darkness, and I couldn't see any ominous shapes in my immediate vicinity. I bit my tongue and turned on my flashlight, slowly lifting the blanket off of myself and shining my light in all directions. Nothing. Are they toying with me? Maybe they're like Stephen King's It. Maybe they want me to be afraid before they eat me so I taste better. Are they even real? I saw that shape in the tunnel, but maybe it was a trick of the light. I heard the humming and I felt that figure looming over me, but maybe it was all in my head. My mother always told me I was beyond help, that my paranoid tendencies would take over me until they killed me. Maybe that's all that's happening now. I keep trying to tell myself that none of this is real, that I'm just going crazy from hunger and exhaustion and cold and isolation. It's getting harder to convince myself of that though, especially now that I notice the dozen or so drops of blood littering my blanket. I think I slept for like 2 hours. It's almost 2 a.m. I'm about to start the 3-hour walk to my next resting point, my next bar. I have to keep moving. Until I can get back online, I'm hoping some of you can help me. I don't think there's any point in figuring out exactly where I am. I don't want anybody else coming in here after me. I don't know if this tunnel's even real at this point, but maybe you guys can give me some ideas on how to proceed. Should I confront the figures the next time they make themselves known? Maybe acknowledging them is the only way I can get out of here. Maybe I have to face my fears. There is a certain shop called Flur in New York City where magical objects can be purchased, rented, stored, or utilized, but only if you have extraordinary means and the right connections. It isn't the sort of place you can simply walk into. Customers can only gain entrance through referral, and all visits are by appointment only. I'm what you might call nouveau riche. No Vanderbilts or Astors populate my family tree, but I've done well for myself, and in the end, money is money. I manage a few important funds, and many of my clients have powerful ties that go back to the days of New Amsterdam. It was one such client that made an introduction for me at Fleur. There was no email or even a phone call, simply a red envelope that arrived with a white card inside listing my name, an address in Manhattan, and an 8 p.m. appointment. The calligraphy was elegant and precise. It was August, hot, and the sun was just setting behind the tall buildings to the west. I arrived promptly, as I always do, to find a 3-story building built of brown bricks. 2 Grecian columns bordered a white door a few steps above street level, but the place was otherwise unpretentious, ordinary even. I knocked once and heard footsteps shuffling slowly toward the door, which soon opened to reveal a woman in her 50s dressed plainly in jeans and a loose-fitting white shirt. "You must be Tara," she said. "I'm Angie, the proprietress. Please follow me." I took a step inside, carefully closing the door behind me. Inside, the house was cozy and clean. I'd expected a crowded maze packed with objects. Instead, we passed an ordinary sitting room with threadbare couches and a kitchen with basic appliances and outdated tile countertops. "It's not what I expected," I said, knowing the words were rude even as they left my mouth. "When I was younger, I was vain," said Ina. She had a bit of a Midwest accent that made me want to discount anything she said. I had plenty of tools at my disposal, and I'd show up at that door glammed up to make men drool and women jealous. In the end, it brought me more trouble than joy. I should have listened to my father. He ran this place for decades before he handed me the keys. He always said it's best to hide in plain sight. Now, I see the wisdom in that. For a moment, something in the periphery of my vision flickered, and in Inga's place I glanced a much taller, thinner woman in a glittering evening gown. Her red hair shimmered like it had been woven with strands of tinsel and fell halfway down her back. Black and green tattoos snaked down her arms. The inks moved slowly beneath her skin. As I followed her into an austere office, the flicker went away and I saw the plain version of her again, smiling at me as if we now shared a secret. "So," she said, "I'm aware of your situation. I sympathize." "Do you have children?" I asked, and she shook her head. "I've never wanted them," she said. "It complicates this line of work. Certain clients see fit to threaten your family's safety if they can't get what they want. Things get quite ugly." She said this with an air of someone who'd crossed many dangerous people and come out on top. I thought it best not to inquire further. "I've tried all the normal methods," I said. "Hormones, IUE, IVF. I was trying not to betray any emotion, but I felt my chest constricting. I'd hate myself if I cried in front of this stranger. I just thought if maybe you had some kind of ointment maybe, or a charm." Jesus, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. She held out a hand, gesturing for me to do the same. Then she took hold of my wrist and spit in my open palm. I tried to draw it back, but her grip was far stronger than it should have been. She rubbed her thumb in small circles all around my skin until the spit was spread evenly. Then finally, she released me and slowly nodded. "Unfortunately, none of the usual methods will work in your case," she said. "There's something blocking you." Blocking me? I tried not to sound too unduly skeptical. Like a diaphragm, I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. "Yes, something powerful that even I can't quite see." Now I rolled my eyes. Of course. My lie meter was going into hyperdrive. I could almost sense that sales pitch coming. Of course I had a 1 in a million problem that would require a very expensive solution, right? "Sounds like you can't help me then," I said, standing. "No," she said. "You can help yourself, but only if you want it badly enough." I hesitated for a moment. I could always try the IVF again. A new method was being pioneered down at the Mayo Clinic. Something to do with treating the ovaries with stem cells maybe, but I could only imagine it ending in utter expensive failure. And then there was the other issue. Marlon, my boyfriend of 8 years, had thrown his hands up at the whole thing, frustrated at my tenacity, which he called obsession. A few days earlier, after our latest fight, he'd stormed out of the apartment without a word and hadn't responded to any of my texts since. "I can help you," she added. I sat down. "I want it more than you could possibly realize," I said. "Many people who show up here believe that," she said. "Some are correct, most aren't. She opened a door and rang a small bell. A few moments later, a thin red-headed man walked in carrying a roll of fabric over his shoulder. "You don't need a salve to shock your womb into obedience," she said. "You need a wish." "Like from a genie?" I said, almost laughing. "You got Robin Williams' ghost in here?" She smiled thinly, as if humoring a child. "There are such things as beings who can grant boons to humans," she said, "but they don't live in lamps or rings, and they are closer to gods than to that blue monstrosity in Aladdin." She nodded to her companion, who knelt and rolled out the fabric. It was a rug, I realized, or what may have passed for one long ago. The gray fabric was beaten and frayed, and black blocky images of antelopes had faded into almost nothing. "The rug is from the Ubaid period, roughly 4800 BCE, explained Inga. "Even were it not charmed, it would be one of a kind amongst the oldest textiles in existence. By the same token, it's likely that it had survived for so long precisely because of its supernatural qualities." I had to stop myself from making a joke about magic carpets. Inga looked deadly serious now. "In the popular imagination, magical objects are portrayed as easy fixes," said Inga. "A lamp you rub, or a sword that slices through stone, a carpet that flies. In reality, most enchanted objects can only be activated through extreme effort and determination. They're merely a foot in the door to seeking supernatural aid. The true effort comes from the seeker." "So how does it work?" I asked. "To contact the being tied to this rug, you must kneel on it for 3 days and nights. During that time, you may not sleep, eat, or drink. If you have proven the strength of your resolve after 3 days, the spirit will visit you in your desire. And I can wish for anything. Most wishes are acceptable, but it's good to know ahead of time that there are limits. You cannot use the wish to kill a living thing or to negate the wish of another. Such things are against the nature of the spirit. It is a generous being by nature, looking to grant the heart's desire of the worthy." "My wish is worthy," I said. She nodded. "You will need time to prepare," she said. "I have a room here that I'll set up for your trial. As I said, you will need to be here for 3 days. Come well nourished and hydrated just after a full night's sleep. Wear loose, comfortable clothes." She paused. "Some clients choose to bring an adult diaper." "You've got to be kidding me." I couldn't help but mutter, but she did not smile. "The cost is $5 million per day," she said. "Non-refundable." I raised my eyebrows. "I was told money wouldn't be an issue," she said. "It's not," I said, regaining my composure. "I would have to sell some of my crypto holdings, the easiest asset to liquidate on short notice." I started to assess the tax implications in my head. "Good," she said, "then we'll set a date." I was able to clear a few days in October for the trial. I told my coworkers I was headed to St. Bart's to do a little beach time. Though I hadn't taken a vacation in years, no one questioned it. If anything, they were glad, telling me it seemed like I could use it. I'd developed a reputation as highly intense, a ballbuster. I think everyone was happy to get a break from me for a few days. I did finally hear from Marlon. He called to let me know he was coming for his things and that he hoped I wouldn't be there when he arrived. It hurt to lose him, but I told myself I was better off moving forward alone. Perhaps I just didn't want to endure the embarrassment of explaining my visit to Flur and the trial awaiting me. If anything, Marlon was even more of a skeptic than I was, but he wasn't the kind of person who really truly wanted anything. He'd gone along with the baby plan partly because of me and partly because it was the thing people did. But I know he never really fantasized about holding a newborn in his arms, taking joy in her little coos and laughs. He was simply along for the ride until things got too hard, and then he wasn't. It was all for the best. If the wish worked as promised, I wouldn't need Marlon or any man. The baby would be all mine. In the days leading up to the trial, I did everything I could to prepare. I caught up on sleep, ate at a small caloric surplus, and did a daily yoga routine to loosen my joints. Embarrassingly, I also prayed to a small statue of Mary my mother had given me as a girl. It was one of the few objects I'd kept from childhood, and I certainly wasn't Catholic anymore, but it felt like it wouldn't hurt. Finally, the day came. I arrived at Fleur and ascended the steps. The door opened before I could even knock, and Inga gestured for me to enter. She was dressed in a sort of white linen uniform with a tan apron. She might have looked at home in a day spa. Indeed, she handed me a glass of ice water with a cucumber floating inside. "It's important to hydrate and best to empty your bladder before you go in," she said. Then, looking me in the eye, she added, "Is your resolve as strong now as when we last met?" "Stronger," I said honestly, and she nodded. I followed Inga up a winding staircase up to the 3rd level, where a narrow, dimly lit hallway opened to an array of doors. As we walked through the hall, it seemed I could hear groans coming from behind several of the door, strange muttering that sounded like prayer from others. Busy morning, I asked. My client's business is strictly confidential, she said. Should anyone come asking about you, I'd say the same. I wondered if it was all people kneeling on rugs behind every door. Surely not. Behind each door was a different object, a different aspiration. I had heard rumors of others who come here for help. A woman in her 50s who lay in a glass coffin that superheated her skin, crisping it like a Thanksgiving turkey's. The pain had been unimaginable, but after 2 hours when she emerged from the coffin, her skin was as taut as a 20-year-old's. Another friend had been asked to finger paint portrait after portrait of her dead lover in blood, until finally the 44th one began to move of its own volition and carried out a long and heartfelt conversation that left her happy for the first time in years. Understood, I said. Thank you. We reached a door near the end of the hall. She tapped the handle a few times in a kind of rhythmic sequence, then turned it slowly open. On the other side of the door was a barren room with no windows. 2 walls were of bare brick, the others were simple white, the paint chipping in places. At the center of the room stood the rug. It looked slightly more important now, set in the middle of the otherwise barren room, like an exhibit at a museum. I was struck by the feeling that I shouldn't touch it. Your trial begins as soon as you place your feet on the rug, said Inga. The spirit will expect you to kneel for the duration of your time here. A bit of stretching from time to time is acceptable, but under no circumstance are you to leave the rug. Should you wish to abandon the trial, simply walk to the door and knock thrice. No negative consequences will befall you, but you will still be expected to pay, and you will not be allowed to attempt the trial again. She paused for a moment. I should have asked this before, she said, but as I mentioned, there's some kind of blockage preventing you from having a child. Do you have enemies? Someone who would care enough to curse you? I tried to think. I'd upset plenty of people in my life, especially at Word. I had ruined certain companies, effectively putting my boot on their necks when they showed the first signs of weakness. I'd sparked selling frenzies that tanked stock prices and ruined small financial empires. An angry tech bro had once pelted me with a milkshake as I left the office. I don't think any of my enemies believe in this stuff, I said, and she nodded. Good, she said. The trial begins now. She walked outside, closing the door behind her, and though I was now the only person in the room, I didn't feel alone at all. The rug had a presence to it, I realized, just not necessarily a human one. Slowly, I removed my heels and circled the rug. The floor was frigid against my bare feet, cold enough to be uncomfortable, yet I found it difficult to will myself to step onto the fabric. Finally, I shook my head. I was being stupid. I would get on the rug. I had never shied away from anything simply because it was hard. This time would be no different. The first few minutes were unremarkable. I knelt on the old fabric and stared blankly at the wall. Years of classes, yoga, barre, Pilates, etc. had trained me for this moment. If anything, when I closed my eyes, I could pretend that I was simply holding child's pose for a bit longer than usual, and that I'd soon be hitting the shower and indulging in a green smoothie. As time wore on, it became harder to maintain this fantasy. My muscles began to ache, and I shifted to other sorts of kneeling, sometimes with my torso elevated, sometimes lying forward and touching the rug with my fingertips. Initially, the rug had seemed to possess no smell, and I imagined it had dissipated over the course of millennia. Now though, with my mind emptied and my senses heightened, I caught notes of odd scents, a kind of burnt one emanating from the black dye and a musky, earthen one from the fabric itself. Did they have sheep back in the olden days of the Fertile Crescent, or had this been woven from the hair of some other animal? The pain became worse. My lower back and knees throbbed. How long had I been kneeling now? Surely not more than a few hours. Was I really ready to endure this for days? I'm going to stand and stretch now, I said, feeling like an idiot. I hope that's okay. That doesn't break the rules, right? There was no response, and I felt extra stupid. Okay, I asked one last time. Looking up, I seemed to spy a haze of something at the far end of the room near the wall in front of me. An old woman was sitting in a chair knitting. For a moment, she looked up from her work and met my eye, then she slowly nodded, giving me permission. Carefully unbending my knees, I stood. The relief was immediate. The fire that had been burning in my joints went out as if doused with a bucket of water. This is still the easy part, said the old woman quietly from the far side of the room. If you don't have the will to continue, better to quit now. There's no prize for quitting halfway or even at the 3/4 mark. You've never met anyone with a will like mine, I said. She snorted a little and went back to her knitting. Kneel, she said quietly, and then she disappeared. The pain grew worse, and if it was just pain, it might have been easy, but your mind plays tricks on you when you hurt. It'll tell you that you're doing permanent injury to your knees and ankles. It'll ask if the tingling sensation in your toes is nerve damage. Could your spine itself be in jeopardy? Will you still be able to walk at the end of all this? But through all of it, I didn't stop kneeling. Every time an intrusive thought arose, I made myself think of my daughter. At times, it was almost as if I could see her. In the vision though, she wasn't a baby, but a woman fully grown, perhaps even my same age. She stood behind the old woman, a hand on her shoulder. She stared at me as if looking for something, perhaps wondering if I'd soon give up, if she'd never come to exist. This wasn't the first time I'd seen my daughter. Since I was a teenager, I've had vivid dreams about her. Us at high tea in matching dresses, arguing the merits of English breakfast and Earl Grey. Me at her college graduation, my eyes welling with tears as she collects her Princeton diploma. Me popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate her putting the down payment on her first apartment, a little one-bedroom in Brooklyn. It was all so clear that it seemed inevitable, like the dreams were a reality just waiting for me once I reached the proper time. I knew I was destined to become the mom that my own mother never was. Yes, my mother was a disaster. She'd moved to New York from rural Virginia, assuming she'd be discovered by some producer at the cafe where she worked and book her ticket to Broadway. Every morning she spent an hour in the mirror, preparing for her big break, but it never came. Instead, there was only an endless procession of men, some with promises of fame and fortune, but mostly just a string of losers that grew increasingly dangerous. I don't like to talk much about that period of my life, except to say that it was terrible and not something I'd wish on anyone. It all ended when I was 12 and came home from school to find her half dead off a bag of gray powder, lying on the couch beside her fully dead boyfriend. I went to live with one of her cousins in Brooklyn after that. She had 2 daughters of her own and worked almost constantly. To her credit, I wasn't treated any worse than her biological children, but that's not saying much. At best, we were all seen as burdens, but at least I was safe. I suppose it made me tough and eager to be nothing like my mother. I grew up hating her and had very little contact with her once I stopped living at her place. At some point, I heard that she died falling from a balcony, an act that may have been self-inflicted or at the hands of a jealous boyfriend, though the truth was never discovered. I chose not to attend the funeral. I suppose I was driven to be my mother's opposite in every way. Through high school, my grades were perfect and I never dated. I told myself that when I was older, I would give my daughter the things I never had. A clean apartment looking over the park, and a stable dad who never drank and woke up early each morning to brew coffee and read the news. A mother who loved her above all other things. I looked up at the old woman. My daughter's shade stooped down and whispered something in her ear. "What?" I asked, attempting to bend my head up to look at them. I realized I barely had the strength to do so. How long had I been here now? I had no phone, no watch. The room had no windows. It could have been the first day or the second, certainly not the third. "She says that you could never love her above all other things," the old woman muttered. "You love yourself too much." Had they read my thoughts? "What does she know?" I asked. "She doesn't know me. She's not even real." My daughter crossed her arms and stared daggers. I should mention that not all of my dreams about my daughter had been good ones. There had been nightmares too. Me arriving home to find her, 16 and in bed with an older boyfriend. Me screaming and hitting her over and over again, shouting that she'd end up like my mom. And more like this. My daughter coming home with a B+ on a report card, or missing curfew by half an hour as a junior in high school. It always ended with me screaming, reminding her that a single step on the path to failure was one too many. I would wake from these dreams full of anger at her, incredulous that my imagined daughter could betray me in such a way. At some point my right knee gave out. I wasn't sure if the joint had ruptured permanently or if it just needed some rest, but there was physically no way I could make it hold position. I collapsed face first onto the rug and looked up at the old woman as if to ask if this was acceptable. She nodded almost imperceptibly. At some point that I had soiled myself. Not quite sure what to do, I removed the stained pants and underwear and tossed them to the side of the room. Then, for whatever reason, I removed my shirt as well, throwing it after the others. I lay curled in a naked ball, looking weakly up at the old woman, who kept busy with her knitting. "How long?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Beside her, my daughter never took her eyes off me. She was smirking just a bit, reveling in my pain. She was the bad girl, the one I'd seen in my dreams. She would disobey me. I would come home from work to find her in a cloud of pot smoke listening to an old Nirvana album, and I would rip the buds from her ears and smash them underfoot over and over again until they were plastic dust. "Give up," she mouthed. And never, I tried to say, but my lips were chapped and bleeding and the words caught in my throat. I knew then that I would amend my wish. I would wish for a good daughter, not her, not the brat looking down at me from the old woman's side. I tried to give voice to these thoughts, to shout them at my daughter, and found I could not. For the first time I felt a pang of true fear. Not that I would give up, but that I would die here, naked on this rug, before I had a chance to make my wish. There had been no promise that I would live. How long could the body go without water? I would have drunk from a gutter or a horse trough were it in front of me. Anything. Shadows were dancing all around the room, a great revel, all ready to carry me off to somewhere dark and permanent. I knew I could make them go away. I could roll off the rug, crawl to the door, beg to be let out, but I would not. I would never relent. My daughter shook her head and, "See," she said, "she'll never bend." The old woman looked up at me and nodded, and I realized that the rug had extended now, growing longer. It reached all the way to the old woman, stretching out to her feet and upper legs, all the way to the needles in her lap that were knitting it longer and longer. She gestured for me to come closer, and I began to crawl, naked and chapped. My right knee fully numb, I dragged myself to her feet. "Tell me what you desire," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "You know," I said, "you need to say it." "A daughter," I said, "my perfect daughter." She thought for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said, "I cannot help you, the rules are the rules." "What are you talking about?" I choked as I asked the question, my throat dry and painful. "Your wish cannot negate the wish of another," she said softly. "I don't understand," I said. What was she talking about? The woman held up the bits of yarns in her lap. They seemed to vibrate, the dancing threads throwing darkness on the wall like shadow puppets. In these shadows a vision formed. It was my daughter years in the future, my same age. She was here in this very room, kneeling on this very same rug. Time moved in fast motion as I watched her suffer just as I had. Her body breaking down, her mind drying into a husk as the lack of sleep and water broke it. But in the end, she too survived the trial. She too crawled to the old woman to make her wish. "I don't want to die," she said through chapped lips, "but I wish I was never born. Could you do that for me?" The old woman looked up at her curiously. "Perhaps. Why is this your wish?" "Because I have never been happy, not one day in my life," my daughter said, blinking away tears. "I had a mother who screamed at me for the slightest misstep. She demanded perfection, and I tried to give it to her. I gave her everything she wanted. I went to Yale, then Harvard Medical School. There's no better doctor in the city, but every day I come home and wish I'd die in my sleep. I haven't spoken to my mom in years, but I still hear her screaming. The second I start to feel happy, she's right there in my ear, telling me I don't deserve an ounce of joy in my life." The old woman nodded. "I can give you what you wish," she said. "Wait," said my daughter. "If you grant the wish, what happens?" The old woman gestured to the work in her lap. "It would be a bit of bother," she said. "I'd have to unravel this a bit." She gestured to the yarn in her lap, still attached to the rug. 38 years worth of work, back to the time of your conception. I'd nudge things just a little bit. A different baby would fill her belly. "No," said my daughter, fighting back tears. "No, no, no. No one else should have to do this, to live this." She thought for a moment, then said, "I want to wish for my mother to be barren, incapable of having a child, ever. Dot." The old woman smiled a bit sadly and nodded. She began to pull at the thread in her lap, unraveling the rug. "Anything else?" "Yes," said my daughter. "One day I want her to find out why." The old woman looked over at me now, then over at my daughter's specter. She shot me one last cruel smile, a look of satisfaction. Then she turned and walked through the darkness of the wall. She would not return. "Do you understand?" asked the old woman. "I can't allow your wish to undo hers." "I understand." "Is there anything else I can offer you?" she asked. I shook my head. She looked up from her knitting one last time. "You may yet think of something," she said. "Come back any time. You know where to find me." Inge must have entered the room shortly after. She gave me a glass of water, which I drank desperately, and a fresh robe. She took me to a shower where I sat and cried on the wet floor. My skin was so broken that I could barely handle the lukewarm temperature. My knee throbbed but had regained a bit of its function. I saw that I would be whole again, physically at least. Since that day I've been at home, slowly repairing myself. Long baths, lunches of chicken broth and juice cut with water. But I can't bring myself to call work or anyone really. I feel that the motor has been ripped out of me, that there's nothing to make me go anymore. What is a life without a purpose? I am not someone accustomed to drifting. And of course I've been angry. At my daughter and at myself. But there's nowhere for those feelings to go. Nothing to do with them. I can't undo the mother I was in some other fabric of reality. body. I am stuck, but at the same time, I have no desire to die. And lately, my thoughts have turned to my own mother, who I suppose made me this way. As I said before, so much of who I am came as a reaction to who she was. I think of the way she cackled when she was high. It was a selfish laugh, a laugh you couldn't share. Late at night, I find myself waking impossibly thirsty, but I do not drink. Instead, I kneel on the bed and stare into the darkness, and I think I see the old woman sitting there. I imagine crawling to her and whispering that I too wish my mother had been barren, that I too want her to know why. I imagine the old woman unraveling another few decades from her work to go back and fix things. And in my reverie, I sometimes hope that I won't be the last one to make this wish, that my mother will do the same, wishing her mother barren, and then on until each bad mother through the centuries is erased along with history itself, the whole rug disappearing as the old woman pulls the thread, until all traces of humanity are wiped away, leaving nothing but a pile of tangled yarn. The first time I saw the 13th floor was just a few days ago, and I hope I will never see it again. It was a normal Monday, and I was exhausted after a long day of work. I work as a nurse at Westview Hospital, and my shifts were always draining, especially that day since I had to work a double. Finally, my shift ended and I hurried out the door. I appreciated not having to worry about parking in a city that was normally so busy. Living so close to work had its advantages. Westview was often still bustling at that hour, but tonight it felt eerily abandoned, as though the world had retreated into the shadows. My apartment building loomed ahead and I quickened my pace, anxious to get inside. I stepped into the lobby of Central Heights, passing by Ray the doorman and offering a polite nod to his wave. Normally, I would have stopped to chat, but I was too tired and was just looking forward to a bath, a stiff drink, and maybe a TV show before I collapsed into sleep. As I made my way toward the elevator, I was already scrolling through my phone for something to watch while waiting for the long ride to the 16th floor. I pressed the button and suddenly felt a strange sensation. The hair on my arm stood on end and I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. No one was in the lobby. Ray was still at his station, absorbed in a novel. It must have been nothing, I tried to reassure myself, yet the feeling persisted, like unseen fingers trailing along my spine. When the elevator finally arrived, I stepped in without hesitation. I quickly pressed 16 and waited. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something odd. A powdery white dust near the elevator console. I checked myself to make sure I hadn't gotten any on me, but there was no trace of it on my clothes or skin. Then I looked closer and saw a chalk-like smudge right on the console between the numbers 12 and 14. A disturbing chill ran through me as my hand hovered near the strange mark. I paused, processing the bizarre sight before the bell chimed and the doors opened to my floor. Shrugging off the unease, I stepped off. I walked down the hall to my apartment and sighed with relief that my day was over. As I approached my door, eager to collapse onto my couch, I rummaged through my bag. A knot formed in my stomach as I realized my keys were still at the hospital, left on the break room counter. I groaned and trudged back to the elevator, resigned to having to retrieve them. I pressed the down button, and after a brief wait, the door opened, not far from where I stood. To my surprise, I wasn't alone in the elevator. There, occupying the small space, was an impossibly large figure draped in a long white coat. Their face was hidden by a hood, and their tall, rail-thin form exuded an unsettling presence. I took an instinctive step back, disturbed by the sight, but I tried to steady myself and not stare. I considered waiting for the next elevator, yet the door wouldn't close. The figure remained motionless, its hood concealing any trace of expression as it stared impassively. Realizing I had no way to get back to my apartment without my keys, I reluctantly stepped into the elevator with the tall figure and pressed the button for the lobby. That's when something made me do a double take. Even with the giant hooded figure standing silently beside me, I noticed an extra button on the panel, a softly glowing 13. It wasn't there earlier when I'd gone up to my own floor. I noticed the 13th button bore a large imprint of white chalky powder, and I saw that the looming figure's feet were also surrounded by that same odd substance. The elevator lurched into motion as I felt a cold dread wash over me. The buttons on the panel flickered in a strange, otherworldly rhythm as the elevator began its descent. The The hooded figure beside me remained completely still, filling the confined space with an oppressive silence. I felt its unseen gaze upon me, its face forever obscured by the hood. My breath caught when the elevator slowed and the digital display above the doors flickered from 14 to a distorted blur, then to a number that sent a chill coursing through my veins, 13. When the doors slid open with a hollow clang, a dimly lit hallway unfolded before me, a place that didn't belong in my building. Thick, damp air spilled out, carrying the scent of old dust mixed with a trace of something metallic. My heart pounded as the figure stepped forward with an unnervingly fluid grace. Pausing in the doorway, it slowly turned its hooded head in my direction, as though silently inviting me to follow. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. My legs refused to budge as my mind screamed for me to run, to shout, to do anything other than step further into that dark, unnatural space. Suddenly, I felt lightheaded and tried to steady myself against the elevator wall, but before I knew it, I crumbled to the floor, unconscious. When I came to, I sat up abruptly and nearly screamed, only to realize that I was still in the elevator. It had descended back to the lobby, and the strange hooded figure was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea how I passed out. Perhaps I was more exhausted than I thought, yet it had felt so real, too real. I'd never experienced such a vivid nightmare before. As I stepped out, I glanced back at the elevator panel one last time and noticed a faint smudge of white powder near it. Shaken, I left and headed back to work to retrieve my keys. When I got back to my building, Ray commented on how stressed I looked. I told him it was nothing more than bad nerves after a long day. He nodded and I pressed on. Yet when I arrived at the elevator again, that inexplicable, unsettling feeling returned. Despite how late it was and how tired I felt, I decided to take the stairs. I was sweating and utterly exhausted after the climb, but eventually I reached my apartment. I chose to forgo the bath in favor of a quick shower and then went straight to bed. The next morning on my way to work, I was disturbed to see paramedics gathered outside the building. Approaching Ray, I asked him what had happened. His face was drawn, his usual smile absent. Leaning in closer and lowering his voice, he said, "It's Mrs. Donovan from 1406. They found her this morning when she didn't answer her door. Her daughter called worried when she couldn't reach her." A chill ran through me. What happened to her? "Nobody knows for sure," Ray replied, glancing toward the paramedics. "The police say it looks strange. There are no obvious signs of what killed her, but..." He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "They mentioned she was covered in some kind of white powder, like chalk or something. I've never seen anything like it in my 30 years here." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. White powder, just like in the elevator, just like in my nightmare. "Did you know her?" Ray asked, noticing the pallor in my face. "Not really," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. "I only passed her in the halls sometimes." I tried to recall her face, but all I could conjure was a vague image of an elderly woman with silver hair who always nodded politely when we crossed paths. "They're saying it might have been sudden cardiac arrest, but who knows," Ray continued. "Poor woman, living alone all these years after her husband passed. At least it was quick, whatever it was." I nodded mechanically, my eyes fixed on the elevator doors. I thanked Ray for the information and mentioned that I had to get to work. Yet deep down, I felt disturbed. I had wanted to dismiss the unsettling news about the tenant found dead, but with that bizarre substance mentioned, it was eerily similar to what I'd seen with that tall hooded figure. The thoughts clung to me, refusing to let me find any peace. The rest of my workday passed in a hazy blur, and I felt detached from everything as I struggled to process the bizarre events of the previous night. I hurried home with anxious dread gnawing at the back of my mind. Arriving back at my apartment building, I mustered the courage to approach the elevator again. The metallic door slid open with a soft ding, and though I hesitated for just a moment, I stepped inside. My eyes darted around the small, dimly lit space, half expecting shadows to flicker in the corners. Taking a steadying breath, I pressed the button for my floor while carefully scanning the panel for anything unusual. This time, the area between the numbers 12 and 14 was clean and unmarked, devoid of any peculiar chalky residue. The elevator hummed quietly as it ascended, leaving only the sterile scent of metal and the gentle whir of machinery. I exhaled a sigh of relief at the return to normalcy and walked down the hall to my apartment. Just as I inserted my key into the lock, I heard footsteps approaching down the hall. smile. Oh hey, I thought that was you. I turned to see Chelsea Matthews, my neighbor from 1604, walking toward me with a reusable grocery bag slung over one arm. Her dark curls were pulled back into a messy bun, and though her face attempted a smile, worry was etched in every line. Hi Chelsea, I greeted her with a forced smile. Chelsea glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. Did you hear about Mrs. Donovan? She whispered, her voice tight. I nodded, still holding my key in the door. Ray told me this morning it's awful. I can't stop thinking about it, Chelsea admitted, clutching her grocery bag closer to her chest. I saw her just 2 days ago in the laundry room. She seemed perfectly fine, even talking about her granddaughter's ballet recital. A chill crept up my spine. Did Ray mention the white powder they found? Her eyes widened. Yes. That's what's so strange. My sister works at the police station as a clerk, and she couldn't tell me much, but she said the investigators were baffled. It wasn't any kind of drug or poison they recognized, just this weird chalky substance all over her apartment. Her voice dropped even lower. The medical examiner still hasn't determined a cause of death. My legs felt weak as I leaned against the door frame. That's disturbing. There's something else, Chelsea confided, stepping even closer. Mrs. Donovan mentioned something weird the last time I saw her. She talked about having nightmares of a tall figure in white visiting her at night. She shook her head. I assumed it was just an old woman's imagination, you know, but now, the key slipped from my fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor, making Chelsea jump. Sorry, I mumbled as I bent to retrieve it with trembling hands. Did she say anything else about this figure? Chelsea furrowed her brow, just that it was impossibly tall and wore some kind of hood. She mentioned it even left marks on her floor, like footprints or something. She shrugged helplessly. I figured it was just her medication giving her vivid dreams. My mouth went dry. And you said this was 2 days ago? Yeah, she nodded. The day before she died. Studying my face, she asked, Are you okay? You look a bit pale. I'm fine, I lied, forcing myself to stand a little taller. Just tired from work. These double shifts are killing me. I fumbled with my key once more. I should get some rest. Alright then, take care and stay safe. I'll see you around and don't work yourself too hard. Have a good rest of the night, Chelsea said, waving as she headed back to her own apartment. I stepped inside my apartment and released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my mind still echoing with all the disturbing things Chelsea had said about Mrs. Donovan and her untimely death. Pushing myself away from the door, I moved through my darkened apartment, flipping on lights as I went. The shadows seemed longer tonight, and the corners of my home appeared darker and more ominous. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands, spilling a few drops on the counter, though I didn't bother to wipe them up. The television droned on in the background as I curled up on my couch, wrapping myself in a throw blanket despite the warmth of the apartment. News footage of paramedics outside my building played silently, a reporter discussing the mysterious death of an elderly resident. I quickly changed the channel. Sleep proved impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, that hooded figure and the impossible 13th floor replayed in my mind. Chelsea's words about Mrs. Donovan's nightmares echoed incessantly, the same nightmares I'd had, the same figure I'd seen. Around midnight, I finally dragged myself to bed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the occasional creaks and groans of the building settling. My eyelids grew heavy despite my anxiety, and eventually I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke with a start, my alarm blaring beside me. For a moment I felt disoriented, unable to tell if I had truly slept or merely closed my eyes for a few minutes. My body felt heavy and my mind foggy as I dragged myself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water did little to wash away my unease. As I dressed for work, I found myself continuously glancing toward my door, half expecting a knock or the turn of the handle. I chided myself for being irrational, but couldn't shake the dread that had firmly taken root in my mind. My morning routine took longer than usual. Every sound startled me. By the time I was ready to leave, I was already running late. I hesitated at my door, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, with morning light filtering through the windows at each end. I locked my door and headed toward the elevator, only to freeze mid-step. There, in the middle of the hallway, stood Chelsea. I recall that she worked at a different hospital across town, yet she was in her hospital scrubs, though they looked rumpled as if she'd slept in them. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. Chelsea, I called out cautiously, are you okay? She didn't respond at first, remaining perfectly still with her gaze fixed on the wall. Something about her unresponsive stillness sent a chill down my spine. Chelsea, I tried again, gently reaching out to touch her shoulder. At my touch, her head snapped toward me, but her eyes remained unfocused, gazing through me rather than at me. Her pupils were dilated and her face looked unnaturally pale. It comes at night, Chelsea whispered, her voice voice raspy and strange. "The shadow of death, it wears white but leaves darkness. It marks them first. The 13th floor, it's waiting there." My blood ran cold. "Chelsea, what are you talking about? There is no 13th floor." "I saw it last night," she continued, her voice slurring slightly. "In the elevator. The button appeared, white dust, so cold." She shuddered violently. "It knows who's next." I gripped her shoulders, shaking her gently. "Chelsea, snap out of it." Blinking rapidly, Chelsea's eyes gradually focused. Color slowly returned to her face as confusion took over. She looked around disoriented before finally recognizing me. Why am I in the hallway?" she murmured, touching her forehead and wincing. "God, I have such a headache. Was I sleepwalking?" "I'm not sure," I said uncertainly, my eyes still fixed on her face. "You were just standing here talking about strange things." "What things?" she asked, frowning as she rubbed her temples. I hesitated before replying, "About a shadow of death, and the 13th floor." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "I don't remember any of that." Glancing at her watch, she gasped, "Oh God, I'm late. I need to get to work." She hurried toward the elevator, then paused and looked back at me with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry about that. Must have been sleepwalking or something. Too many night shifts, you know." Before I could utter a word, Chelsea disappeared around the corner toward the elevator, and I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind racing. The coincidence was too overwhelming. Mrs. Donovan's experience, my own, and now Chelsea mentioning the same horrors. Later, at work, I couldn't focus. Twice, I nearly administered the wrong medication to patients, catching myself just in time. Colleagues asked if I was feeling ill, noting my pallor and distracted state. I blamed it on lack of sleep, which wasn't entirely untrue. During my lunch break, I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad that I had no appetite for. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about my building's history. Central Heights had been built in the 1970s and renovated in the early 2000s. Nothing unusual, a standard high-rise apartment building. I scrolled further until I stumbled across an old newspaper article about an architectural controversy during its construction. The original plans had included a 13th floor, but due to superstition, the developers had labeled it the 14th, skipping 13 altogether. What caught my attention was a small paragraph noting that the chief architect had either gone missing or died mysteriously before construction was completed. His body was never found either way. My hands trembled as I set down my phone. It couldn't be a mere coincidence. The rest of my shift dragged on endlessly. By the time I clocked out, darkness had fallen and a fine mist hung in the air, diffusing the streetlights into hazy orbs. I considered taking a different route home, maybe even staying at a hotel for the night, but the thought seemed ridiculous in the rational light of the hospital lobby. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped out into the night. The walk home felt longer than usual, each shadow making my heart skip a beat. When I finally reached my building, I noticed Ray was gone for the day, replaced by a night doorman whose name I couldn't recall and who barely looked up from his phone as I entered. I hesitated at the elevator and then decided to head for the stairs, unwilling to risk another encounter. However, when I reached the door to the stairwell, to my shock, it was locked. I turned around and tried to flag down the night doorman, but he had vanished. I looked around unsure of what to do next when suddenly the elevator doors opened. I stared at the vacant elevator, its fluorescent light flickering ever so slightly. The interior was pristine, no white powder, no mysterious buttons, no towering figure, just an ordinary elevator waiting patiently for a passenger. Rational thought urged me to step inside, especially since the stairwell was locked and I needed to get to my apartment, yet my feet remained rooted to the lobby floor, my body refusing the simple command to move. A soft chime sounded as the doors began to close. Acting on instinct, I lunged forward, thrusting my arm between the closing doors. They retracted immediately and I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. My finger hovered over the button panel. 16. I could just press 16 and go home. But then my eyes were drawn to the space between 12 and 14, the unmarked space where 13 should be. The doors closed behind me with a soft thud that, in my heightened state, sounded like the slam of a prison gate. I pressed 16 quickly, then backed into the corner, watching the numbers illuminate as the elevator began to ascend. Everything seemed normal at first, and as I ascended I tried to ignore the lingering feeling of dread. I watched the display numbers slowly increase. Then, to my horror, the elevator stopped. It had halted at 12, but the door wouldn't open. Then the number distorted and went blank, and I felt the elevator creeping up several more feet before stopping on a floor higher than the 12th. The door slid open and there it was. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, impossibly tall, its white coat hanging from skeletal shoulders. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator. My scream caught in my throat. White dust swirled around the figure's feet, drifting into the elevator like fog. "Please," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure what I was begging for. The hooded figure bent down and stepped into the elevator. With each step, a noxious cloud of chalky dust spread around it, and I covered my mouth in horror. It extended one impossibly long arm, the sleeve falling back to reveal a hand made entirely of bone, gleaming white in the dim light. It reached out with slow, deliberate motion. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I won't go with you." The figure tilted its hooded head as if puzzled by my refusal. It took a step forward. With every movement, white dust billowed, filling the cramped space with a fine mist that made me cough. A cold emanated from it, an otherworldly chill that penetrated my soul and froze my thoughts. Its hand moved toward the panel, paused, then withdrew as it stepped back into the opposite corner of the elevator. It stood motionless, waiting for the doors to close. I couldn't fathom why it had ignored me, seeming content to ride the elevator up to the 16th floor rather than drag me down into the sepulchral darkness of the 13th. The elevator rose without further incident, the floors passing by in terrible silence as I remained breathless and terrified alongside my monstrous companion. When we arrived at the 16th floor, the entity extended an arm as if bidding me to disembark first. Oddly polite, though still utterly horrifying. I took a nervous step forward, scared of moving, yet even more terrified of staying a moment longer with that skeletal nightmare. I crept past the looming figure and eventually broke into a mad sprint down the hall toward my apartment. I stole one last glance behind me. The thing was gone. Whatever it had been doing on that floor, I couldn't say, but I felt an urgent need to get inside and hide as quickly as possible. I made it to my door, my heart racing as I fumbled with my keys before throwing myself inside, quickly closing and locking the door before bolting to my bedroom. The night stretched on interminably as I huddled beneath my blanket, feeling both foolish and fearful. Part of me knew that the skeletal figure I dreaded wouldn't materialize in my bedroom or elsewhere in my apartment, yet another part couldn't shake the unsettling anticipation that it might. As the hours dragged by with no sign of the apparition, I hesitated, relieved yet still anxious, before finally succumbing to an uneasy sleep. That sleep, however, was short-lived. I awoke abruptly to a horrible scream that pierced the quiet night. Bolting upright, my heart pounding, I realized the scream wasn't part of a nightmare. It echoed through the hallway outside my apartment, followed by a heavy thud. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for my phone as I debated whether to call 911 or hide in the bathroom. A strange compulsion drew me toward the door instead. I pressed my eye to the peephole, my breath fogging the small glass circle. At first I saw nothing, then movement caught my eye, a figure walking slowly toward the elevator. It was Chelsea. Her movements were unnervingly stiff, limbs jerking slightly with each step as if controlled by invisible strings. Her eyes were wide and vacant, staring straight ahead. Behind her loomed that same white-robed figure, impossibly tall, its skeletal frame nearly brushing the ceiling. One bone-white hand hovered inches from Chelsea's back, guiding her without actual contact. White dust billowed with each unearthly step, leaving a trail of chalky footprints on the carpet. "Chelsea," I whispered, my hand clutching the doorknob. I knew I should open the door, or scream, or do something, but my body refused to move. Chelsea and the figure reached the elevator. The door slid open without either of them pressing a button, revealing an inky darkness. As they stepped inside, Chelsea's head turned slowly, mechanically, toward my apartment. Even through the peephole, I could see that her eyes were completely white now, dusted with the same chalky substance trailing behind the hooded figure. Our gazes locked for one terrifying moment before her face went slack again, and she and the figure stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime that seemed disturbingly ordinary amid the horror. I stumbled backward from the door, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the floor, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. Chelsea, the figure was taking her to the 13th floor, just as it had tried to take me. Images of Mrs. Donovan's death flashed through my mind, found covered in white powder, dead without explanation. I knew I had to do something. I had to help Chelsea. With trembling hands, I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. My phone showed full service, yet the call failed repeatedly. Frustrated, I tossed the useless device onto the couch and scrambled to my feet, pulling on a sweatshirt over my pajamas and shoving my feet into sneakers. The rational part of me screamed that I should stay inside, lock the door, and wait until morning, but Chelsea was my neighbor and I had to try and do something. I grabbed a kitchen kitchen knife, fully aware that it would be useless against whatever that thing was, yet clinging to the faint feeling of security it provided. I flung open the door and stepped out into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The corridor was empty now, but a ghostly trail of white powder led me to the elevator. Clutching the knife in my sweaty hand, I followed the shimmering, luminescent powder on the carpet. When I reached the elevator, I saw the doors still closed and the indicator light paused between floors. My finger hovered over the call button. Was I really doing this? Was I truly going to follow that thing to wherever it had taken Chelsea? Before I could decide, the indicator light began to move again. The elevator was coming back up. I ducked behind a decorative plant in the corner, crouching low as the elevator chimed its arrival. The door slid open, revealing an empty car. No sign of Chelsea or the figure, just more of that white powder dusting the floor. I approached slowly, knife extended before me. The elevator's interior had a thicker layer of the powder, swirling gently as if disturbed by an unseen breeze. Something compelled me forward, not curiosity, but a desperate need to find Chelsea and rescue her from whatever fate had befallen Mrs. Donovan. I stepped inside, my shoes leaving prints in the dust. The doors closed behind me and I realized I hadn't pressed a button. The panel remained dark. No, I whispered to myself. I was too late. The only trace left was the eerie powder shaped like a skeletal finger pressed on the section between the 12 and 14 buttons. I stepped off that horrific elevator and walked numbly back to my apartment, praying that all of this was just a terrible dream. The next day, my greatest fears were confirmed. I rushed downstairs as quickly as I could, and upon emerging in the lobby, I saw the police and paramedics gathered outside the building. My heart sank. Ray was back at his post, and noticing my horrified expression as I appeared in the lobby, he confirmed the truth I had been dreading. With an ashen face, he said in a low voice, "Found her in the hallway this morning, just like Mrs. Donovan, no signs of a struggle, no obvious cause." Leaning closer and glancing around the empty lobby, he added, "And that same white powder all over her. The police are saying it might be some kind of toxic substance in the building. They're bringing in specialists today." I gripped the edge of Ray's desk to steady myself. "Are you alright?" he asked, concern deepening the lines on his weathered face. "You look a bit shaken." "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just shocked. I talked to her yesterday. She seemed fine." Ray nodded solemnly. "They're saying it might be some kind of chemical hazard. Management's called an emergency meeting tonight. They are trying not to freak people out." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Between you and me, I've been working here for 16 years. I've never seen anything like this. 2 people in 1 week, under the same mysterious circumstances. Has anyone else reported anything unusual?" I asked in a barely audible whisper. "Anything about the building, the elevator?" Ray's expression shifted subtly. "Funny you should ask. Mrs. Henderson from 1214 mentioned something about the elevator stopping on a floor that doesn't exist." He shook his head. "I told her she must have pressed the wrong button or imagined it. You know, 13th floor superstition gets to people. This building is old enough to have its quirks." I nodded mechanically. Someone else had seen it. I wasn't losing my mind. "Ray," I said carefully, "have you ever noticed anything strange about the elevator, white powder maybe, or unusual people using it late at night?" Ray's eyes sharpened as he studied me. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I offered, my attempt at casual conversation failing miserably. Glancing around once more, Ray motioned for me to lean closer. "There have been stories about this building for years," he whispered. "Back in the 70s, during construction, workers refused to continue after dark. They said they saw things. Management called it superstition and fired anyone who complained." He paused before adding, "The architect went missing and the foreman died before it was finished, found in the elevator shaft between what would have been the 13th floor. Covered in white powder," I murmured, finishing for him. His eyes widened and he nodded slowly. For a long, heavy moment, Ray was silent. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I've worked here for 30 years. I've seen residents come and go. I've watched this building age. 3 years ago, the night janitor quit without notice, left his keys, his uniform, everything. He just disappeared. Before he left, he told me something I've never forgotten." He swallowed hard. "He said he'd seen death itself in the service elevator, wearing a heavy white coat." A chill ran down my spine. "And did you believe him?" "I didn't," Ray admitted. "I thought he was hitting the bottle too hard. But then," he trailed off, glancing toward the bank of elevators, "I've seen things too. Glimpses, shadows where there shouldn't be shadows." "Why haven't you left?" I asked quietly. Ray's expression hardened. "This is my home. It has been for a long time. Whatever's happening, I'm not letting it chase me away." He straightened, returning to his professional demeanor. "You should be careful. Maybe stay with family for a few days until they figure out what's going on." I nodded, though I knew no investigation would uncover the truth. What was happening defied all rational explanation. "Thank you, Ray," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll be careful." I briefly considered taking the day off from work, but I decided against it since I figured I could use the distraction to ignore the insanity swirling around me there. At the busy hospital, I almost forgot the horrors of the night before, but as my shift ended, the dread of returning home settled over me. I lingered for a while, making small talk with colleagues who were just starting their shifts, anything to delay the inevitable. Outside, twilight had fallen. The streets were quieter than usual, or perhaps it only seemed so to me as each echoing footstep counted down the moments until I got back to my home. Central Heights loomed ahead, its windows lit against the darkening sky. How many residents had no idea what lurked between the floors? How many came and went, oblivious to the horror stalking the hallways at night? As I approached the entrance, I noticed a small crowd gathered outside. Police tape cordoned off part of the sidewalk, and officers were speaking with some residents. An ambulance idled nearby, lights off but doors open. "What's happening?" I asked a pale-faced woman hovering at the edge of the crowd. The woman turned and said in a shaky tone, "Another one. Mrs. Henderson from 1214. Found her in the stairwell about an hour ago." My blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson, the same woman Ray had mentioned who'd seen the 13th floor. My legs nearly gave way. "White powder?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She nodded. "That's what they're saying. Just like the others, 3 deaths in 1 week. People are talking about moving out." I pushed through the crowd toward the entrance. Ray wasn't at his post, probably being questioned by the police, and the other night doorman looked visibly shaken. "Excuse me," he called as I passed. "They're advising residents to stay elsewhere tonight if possible. Building management is putting people up at the Coventry Hotel until they determine if there's an environmental hazard." "Thanks," I mumbled in a terrified daze. I wasn't in any mood to argue. I headed for the Coventry Hotel, hoping for a night's safety away from the building and its haunting specter of death. After checking into my room, my mind whirled with doubt and fear. The terrifying enigma of Central Heights dominated my thoughts, compelling me to consider leaving. Whatever was happening in that building, be it a deadly hallucinogenic powder or the grim specter of death itself, it did not matter anymore. I had to get out. The urge to flee was overwhelming, though a small, nagging part of me hesitated at the idea of abandoning the familiar for the unknown. I didn't have much money, and while I could potentially find a smaller place and hire movers to leave that cursed building behind, the decision felt more daunting than ever. I eventually resolved to leave and find someplace else to live. It was a hasty decision, but I grimly speculated that it might be a life or death situation, and I shuddered at the thought of the people I knew who had already been taken. With that resolution, I tried to settle down, and at last, I fell into a relatively comfortable sleep. Then, as if in the very next moment, my eyes snapped open in a flash. To my horror, I was alone in the elevator. White dust was everywhere on the floor, swirling in the air, coating my skin. The numbers on the panel flickered, and a single glowing button remained, 13. I hadn't pressed it, but the elevator moved anyway, descending to a floor that shouldn't exist. When the doors opened, I didn't see a hallway, but a vast, cavernous space. White dust drifted like snow in stagnant air. In the center stood that hooded figure, even taller than before, its skeletal hands extended toward me. At its feet lay 3 bodies, Mrs. Donovan, Chelsea, and Mrs. Henderson, their skin bleached white, eyes open yet unseeing. Behind the figure, more shapes emerged from the swirling dust, dozens, hundreds of them, all victims of the thing that dwelled between floors, and it was waiting for me to join them. Despite my overwhelming horror, a strange compulsion tugged at me, defying all logic. Before I could resist, my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the morbid sight. The doors closed behind me with a metallic groan, and in the distance I heard the faint hum of the retreating elevator, leaving me alone with that enigmatic figure. It moved ahead, its long coat dragging along the floor and leaving a trail of white, chalky dust. In a daze, I followed as the oppressive silence wrapped around me like a shroud. The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls lined with doors that bore no resemblance to those in my own building. They were older, heavier, each adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Abruptly, the figure halted, tilting its head slightly as if straining to listen to something. I strained my ears, desperate to catch any sound, but only near silence met me. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to hear a faint whisper, soft and indistinct, steadily growing louder. The sound sent shivers down my spine, completely out of place in that world. The figure turned to face me, and for the first time, I noticed a subtle movement beneath its hood. Shadows twisted and writhed within. My breath caught as the figure raised a hand, its impossibly long, pale fingers pointing toward a door at the far end of the hall. As the whisper grew clearer, a jolt of terror struck me when I heard my name called repeatedly in a voice disturbingly familiar. The door at the end of the hall creaked open by itself, revealing a space bathed in eerie, flickering light. I took a hesitant step back, but it was too late. The figure seized my arm with a cold, unyielding grip and pulled me forward. I stumbled toward the open door as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and in that moment, I stepped through the threshold into a nightmare from which I might never awake. And yet I did wake, gasping and tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The hotel room was dark except for the red glow of the digital clock reading 3:13 a.m. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I fumbled for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, revealing ordinary hotel furnishings. No dust, no figures. Just a bland room with standard artwork and heavy curtains drawn against the night. I collapsed back onto the pillows, trying to slow my breathing. It had just been a nightmare, but as I glanced toward the carpet near the door, I saw a fine white powder dusting the threshold, as if someone or something had tried to enter. Frozen, I stared at the white trace. It hadn't been there when I checked in. Then a sinking dread gripped me. My eyes darted down to my feet, now engulfed in a thick layer of the eerie, chalky substance. Panic surged as I bent to touch my foot, and there it was, a bruise, vivid and sinister, marking the exact spot where an otherworldly hand had seized my arm with unyielding force. Desperation clawed at my mind as I scrambled for a shred of logic, but only chaos answered. The figure had found me. Even here, miles from Central Heights, it had tracked me down, or perhaps I'd even ventured into its lair in my sleep. It couldn't be real, but the powder by the door and on my feet was real. The deaths were real, and whatever was hunting me wouldn't stop until it had claimed me too. I hurriedly dressed, hands shaking as I stuffed my few belongings into a bag. I knew I had to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and everything here. I crossed several state lines and did not have a destination, besides as far away as I could get from that nightmare and the being that might even now still be searching for me. Yet, even abandoning my possessions and leaving, doubt still gnaws at my resolve. Perhaps leaving the city entirely and abandoning everything might be enough. But deep down, I wonder whether it could ever be enough. I don't know if I can ever outrun the shadow of death itself that haunts the 13th floor.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.